Yo, what's up everyone? It's Vision Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Ragnok's audit found Dumbledore paid Weasleys 5,000 galleons monthly to control Harry since age 1, drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Ledger opens. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry Potter knew it was Tuesday because Aunt Petunia always bleached the kitchen floor on Tuesdays, and the smell of chemicals had woken him up at 6 in the morning, seeping through the gap under his cupboard door like a slow poison. He lay on his cot in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house above him, Vernon's heavy footsteps crossing to the bathroom, Dudley's television already blaring some cartoon through the ceiling, and thought about the dream he'd just had. It was always the same dream. Green light. A woman's voice, high and desperate, saying not Harry, please, not Harry, and then nothing. Just darkness and the distant sound of a motorcycle. He didn't know what it meant. He'd stopped asking. He was 11 today. He'd been waiting for something to happen on this birthday with a certainty he couldn't explain, the way you sometimes know a storm is coming hours before the sky changes color. Something in his chest had been pulling tight for weeks, like a knot being drawn slowly closed, and this morning it felt wound to breaking. Petunia did not wish him happy birthday. Vernon left for work without looking at him. Dudley threw a piece of toast at his head when he came into the kitchen, missed, and seemed satisfied anyway. The letter came at 9:30. It came through the mail slot with 3 other envelopes, a bill, a catalogue for garden furniture, and something from the dentist, and it landed on the mat with a softness that had nothing to do with paper. Harry was the one who'd been told to collect the post, so he was the one who saw it first, a heavy, cream-colored envelope with emerald green ink, addressed in a handwriting that swept and curled like it enjoyed itself. Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The cupboard under the stairs. Someone knew exactly where he slept. He stood there in the hallway with the letter in both hands for a long moment. The knot in his chest pulled tighter and then, oddly, loosened. He didn't open it. He didn't know why. He tucked it under his oversized shirt, handed Vernon the rest of the post, and went to do the washing up. He read it in the cupboard that night, after everyone had gone to bed, by the light of a small torch he'd found in a kitchen drawer 6 months ago and quietly kept. The letter was formal and strange and wonderful, an invitation to a school called Hogwarts, a list of supplies including things like 1 wand and a cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, and a ticket for a train that left from a platform number that didn't appear on any map he'd ever seen. He read it 4 times. Then he lay back on his cot and stared at the underside of the stairs and thought, so it's real, then. Whatever I am, it's real. He fell asleep with the letter pressed flat against his chest and didn't dream about green light at all. The next morning, before Vernon was awake, before Dudley's television, before Petunia's chemical warfare on the kitchen floor, Harry Potter made a decision. He didn't know where this school was. He didn't know how to get there. But the letter said his Hogwarts place would be confirmed upon arrival at Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Diagon Alley, where his family trust vault had been prepared. Family trust vault. He had money. Somewhere, he had money, and it had his name on it, and nobody had ever told him. He put on his shoes, tucked the letter in his back pocket, and walked out the front door. Getting to London took 3 buses and most of his saved birthday money, £2.47, accrued over years of finding dropped coins in the playground, but he made it by 11 in the morning. Finding the leaky cauldron took longer. He walked up and down Charing Cross Road twice, feeling faintly ridiculous, and then stopped in front of a narrow building wedged between a bookshop and a record store that his eyes kept sliding away from and thought, that's it. Something in him recognized it the way you recognize a word in a language you've never been taught but somehow know. Inside was dim and warm and smelled of old wood and something herby. The patrons were wearing robes. A few of them looked up when he walked in, and one old man in the far corner actually dropped his glass. Harry sat down at the bar. The barman, pink, round, nearly hairless, looked at him with eyes that were going slowly wet. "Bless me," the man said. "It's Harry Potter." It is, Harry agreed, because it seemed rude to deny it. I'm trying to get to Gringotts. Through the back, the barman said immediately, and pointed, and then seemed to need to sit down. The alley behind the leaky cauldron was extraordinary. Harry walked through it slowly, taking it in, the crooked buildings packed together like books on an overfull shelf, the windows full of impossible things, the people in robes and pointed hats treating it all as entirely ordinary, and made himself keep moving. There would be time to look later. Right now he needed the bank. Gringotts was unmistakable, white stone, massive, columns so tall they made Harry's neck ache to look up, and goblins at every door with expressions that suggested they had seen everything twice already and found it unimpressive. Harry walked up the front steps, pushed open the enormous bronze door, walked past the inner silver door and its engraved warning, "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed," and stepped into the marble hall. Goblins behind every counter. The sound of quills and scales and the distant rumble of carts going somewhere deep underground. Gold light falling through high windows. Harry went to the nearest counter. "Excuse me," he said. "I have a Hogwarts letter. It says I have a family trust vault." The goblin looked at him. Then the goblin looked harder, with a kind of focused sharpness that felt less like recognition and more like calculation. "Name," the goblin said. "Harry Potter." Every quill in the room stopped moving. It was very brief, half a second, maybe less, and then everything started again, but Harry had felt it, that collective pause, like a held breath. The goblin behind the counter was already reaching for something beneath the desk. "One moment," it said, in a tone that meant don't move. Harry didn't move. The goblin came back 2 minutes later with another goblin who was older, shorter, and wearing robes that were significantly better quality than anyone else's in the hall. This one moved through the crowd of clerks with the casual authority of someone who had never had to ask for space in his life. "Mr. Potter," he said. He had a deep voice for someone so small, and black eyes that were currently aimed at Harry like a pair of crossbows. "I am Ragnok, Director of Gringotts, London. I wonder if you would follow me." It wasn't really a question. Harry followed him. The office was up 2 flights of narrow stairs and through a door that unlocked itself when Ragnok approached. Inside was a room that managed to be both cluttered and precisely organized, stacks of ledgers on shelves that went up to the ceiling, a massive desk covered in parchment, and 2 chairs facing it that looked like they'd been designed for goblin proportions. Harry sat in one anyway, his feet almost touching the floor, and waited. Ragnok went behind the desk. He did not sit immediately. He picked up a thick leather-bound ledger from the corner of the desk, opened it to a page near the middle, and looked at it for a moment with his head slightly tilted, the expression of a man confirming something he'd already suspected. Then he sat down and put the ledger on the desk between them, open. "Do you know what this is?" Ragnok asked. Harry looked at the page. Columns of numbers, dates going back years. He didn't recognize the account numbers, but one name he did recognize, his own. Potter Family Vault, Trust Account, H.J. Potter. And next to it, another name, Weasley, A.W. "No," Harry said. "But I think I'm about to." Something shifted in Ragnok's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration, like he'd been prepared for denial or confusion and was adjusting his approach for neither. "Your Hogwarts letter," Ragnok said, "carries your first official magical signature. The moment it was sealed, it triggered a series of automatic audit protocols on all accounts connected to your name. This is standard goblin law for any account holder reaching majority threshold." He tapped the ledger. "The audit was completed this morning. Before you arrived, as it happens, which suggests you have good instincts." "What did the audit find?" Ragnok turned the ledger so Harry could read it properly. "For 121 consecutive months, beginning in the November following your parents' deaths, the sum of 5,000 galleons has been withdrawn from your family trust account and deposited into the joint account of Arthur Weasley and Molly Weasley." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. The authorization signature on every single transaction belongs to Albus Dumbledore. The room was very quiet. Harry looked at the numbers. He was good at maths, one of the few things the Dursleys hadn't managed to beat out of him, probably because good marks in maths made Petunia look like a capable guardian, and he did the arithmetic quickly and without any particular emotional interference. 5,000 galleons. Every month. For over 10 years. How much is 5,000 galleons in pounds, he asked. At current exchange, approximately 25,000. So Dumbledore has been paying this family, Harry said, his voice careful and even, £25,000 a month, for 10 years, from money that belongs to me. That's 3 million galleons total, Ragnok said. 15 million pounds. Harry put his hands flat on the desk and breathed. He'd expected something, today. He'd felt it coming. But this was, he made himself stop and think, actually think, rather than react. What did it mean? Why would Dumbledore pay a family that much money from Harry's own vault? What did Dumbledore want from the Weasleys badly enough to spend 15 million pounds of someone else's money on it? To control Harry. That was the only answer that fit. You don't spend that kind of money on someone for 10 years unless they're doing something very specific for you. Who are the Weasleys? He asked. Ragnok studied him for a moment. A wizarding family. 6 children. They will be enrolling their youngest son, Ronald, at Hogwarts this year. A pause. Several parties, including Albus Dumbledore, have expressed interest in ensuring you and Ronald Weasley become close friends. There it was. Harry thought about the dream, the green light, the woman's voice. He thought about living in a cupboard for 11 years while his family had 15 million pounds. He thought about Vernon's face every morning, the particular pleasure Petunia took in reminding him he was nothing, the careful way the Dursleys had worked to make him small. And then he thought about a man he'd never met, a man the barman downstairs had nearly cried over, a man with a very long name on an official authorization signature, who had apparently decided that Harry Potter's life needed to be arranged. Is there more? Harry asked. Ragnok reached under the desk and produced a second folder. Considerably more, he said. The second folder was worse than the first. It contained, among other things, a healer's analysis of Harry's magical signature, the kind of deep-level scan Gringotts performed on all trust accounts during major audits, because the account holder's magical health was considered relevant to inheritance documentation. The analysis had been flagged 3 times in red ink. What are the flags? Harry asked. The first, Ragnok said, is a standard compulsion charm. Not strong enough to force specific actions, but strong enough to create behavioral tendencies, toward passivity, toward deference, toward the suppression of competitive instinct. Applied when you were very young, likely within your first year of life. It has been renewed remotely approximately every 18 months. Harry stared at him. The second flag is more complex. It is an emotional dampening charm targeting what we call the loyalty center of magical cores, the part of a witch or wizard's magic that regulates personal bonds, trust, instinctive affection. When this is suppressed, a person becomes more susceptible to manufactured relationships. They can be guided toward affection for specific people the caster wants them close to, because their natural instincts for distinguishing genuine care from performed care are muted. Someone made me easier to manipulate, Harry said. Someone made you significantly easier to manipulate, yes. And the third flag? Ragnok opened the folder to the last page. Your parents had a will, Mr. Potter. James and Lily Potter prepared a full legal testament, notarized by Gringotts and a ministry solicitor, on the 21st of October, 1981, 4 days before their deaths. Under Goblin law, this document is binding and permanent. Under Wizarding Ministry law, it was also filed and should have been executed upon their deaths. He looked at Harry steadily. It was not executed. According to our records, the will was sealed by Ministry Order, Emergency Clause 7, on the 1st of November, 1981. The authorizing signature belongs to Albus Dumbledore. What does the will say? It names Sirius Black as your primary guardian. It specifically and explicitly states that you are, under no circumstances, to be placed with Petunia Dursley. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Heavy. Dense with implication. Harry sat with it for a long moment. He thought about the cupboard. About the lock on the outside of the door that Vernon used to use, before Harry started making strange things happen when he was scared and Vernon decided it was better not to push. About the way Petunia said his mother's name, Lily, like it was a small, dirty word. He thought about Sirius Black, who was apparently in Azkaban prison, who was apparently a murderer, and who was apparently the person his parents had specifically wanted to raise him. Is Sirius Black guilty? Harry asked. Of whatever they put him in Azkaban for? Ragnok was quiet for a moment. That is a question with a complicated answer. What I can tell you is that he was imprisoned without trial. In the chaos following your parents' deaths, normal legal procedure was bypassed by ministry officials. Albus Dumbledore advocated strongly for immediate incarceration. Of course he did, Harry said. He picked up the first ledger and looked at the numbers again. 5,000 galleons. Every month. The authorization signature, over and over, APWB Dumbledore. He thought about what kind of man signs his name to something like this every 18 months for 10 years. Not a man who doubts himself. Not a man who thinks he might be wrong. A man who is completely certain that what he's doing is necessary. That, somehow, was the most frightening thing in the folder. What do you want from this, Ragnok? Harry asked. The goblin's eyes sharpened further. He'd clearly been waiting for this question and was pleased it had come without prompting. Gringotts has operated under specific legal constraints regarding human-goblin financial relationships for 3 centuries. Albus Dumbledore has violated those constraints repeatedly and flagrantly, using your account as his instrument. He has forged, and yes, Mr. Potter, what he did to your account authorization constitutes forgery under Goblin commercial law, financial documents, bypassed inheritance protocols, and used Goblin financial infrastructure as a tool for what amounts to the long-term management of a minor's life and relationships. Ragnok's voice had not raised in volume at all, but it had changed in texture, harder, like stone under thin soil. Gringotts wants the legal precedent of this prosecution to be established on record. Dumbledore has treated our institution as a convenience. I intend to demonstrate that it is not. So you have your own reasons, Harry said. I have always had my own reasons. They currently align with yours. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. What can you do for me? Legally, I mean. What power do I actually have? Ragnok leaned back slightly and steepled his long fingers together. You have more than you know. The immediate actions available to us are as follows. First, Gringotts can freeze all unauthorized withdrawals from your accounts with immediate effect. The Weasley payment stopped today. Second, Gringotts can petition the Wisengamot for the unsealing of your parents' will, on the grounds of improper ministry override. Third, he paused, we can begin the process of removing the compulsion and loyalty charms from your magical core. This will require a specialized cursebreaker team. It will be unpleasant. But until it is done, you should be aware that your instincts regarding people and relationships are not entirely your own. That last part landed like a stone in still water. Harry had always known, on some level, that something was off about him. Not wrong exactly, more like a compass that was slightly off north, reliable enough for most purposes but occasionally pulling in a direction that didn't feel quite true. He'd never had anyone explain what it was. He'd assumed it was just what growing up in the Dursleys' house did to a person. Now he found out it had a name and a spell behind it and a man's signature authorizing its renewal. Start the removal, Harry said. It will take several sessions. The first we can begin today. Then let's begin. The Cursebreaker was a female goblin named Sharpthorn who had the brisk efficiency of a surgeon and about the same amount of small talk. She sat Harry in a chair in a side room off Ragnok's office, smaller, warmer, with the smell of something burning that wasn't quite incense, and pressed two copper-capped instruments against his temples and told him not to move. What happened next was the strangest experience of Harry's life, which was saying something given that his life had included a boa constrictor conversation and spontaneously appearing on a school roof. It started as pressure, not pain, exactly, but the feeling of something being pried, like fingers working under the edge of a lid that had been sealed for years. Then it became heat, moving through the center of him in slow waves, and behind the heat came things that weren't quite memories, impressions, really. The emotional residue of 10 years lived under a dampening charm. He felt, for the first time in his life, what clean instinct felt like. Just briefly, just a sliver of it, and the contrast was startling. Like the difference between seeing a painting under artificial light and seeing it under open sky. There's so much, he thought. Not sadness or anger, specifically, though those were present. Just, so much. He'd been living in a reduced version of himself. Every social interaction he'd ever had, every friendship or lack of friendship, every moment of loneliness or connection, all of it filtered and muted and shaped by someone else's hands. First session is complete, Sharpthorn said, pulling the instruments away. She looked at him the way mechanics look at a car they're enjoying working on. You will feel disoriented for some hours. Emotional responses may be sharper than you are accustomed to. This is normal. How many sessions? Minimum 4. The loyalty charm is deeper and older. Compulsion charm will clear in 2 to 3 sessions. Loyalty suppression may require more. Harry nodded and stood up. He felt slightly unsteady, not dizzy, exactly, but recalibrated, like he'd had his eyes tested and been given the right prescription for the first time. Back in the main office, Ragnok had laid out several documents. These require your signature, the goblin said. They authorize Gringotts to act as your legal and financial representative in matters pertaining to the audit, the will, and the account review. They also revoke Dumbledore's proxy authorization, effective immediately. Harry read each document carefully. Ragnok waited without any sign of impatience, which Harry appreciated enormously. He signed his name 7 times. His handwriting looked different on the parchment than it ever had on school work, firmer, somehow. More like a statement than an apology. There is one more thing, Ragnok said, after the last signature was dried. He reached into the desk drawer and produced a small envelope. This was found in the personal effects of your parents' vault. It has never been opened. It is addressed to you. Harry looked at the envelope. It was old, 11 years old, and the ink was faded, but the handwriting was clear. For Harry, when he is ready. His mother's handwriting. He didn't know how he knew it was her handwriting. He just did, the same way he'd known the leaky cauldron was real when his eyes tried to slide past it. He took the envelope and put it in his pocket without opening it. Not yet. Not here. What happens now? He asked. Now, Ragnok said, you go to Diagon Alley. You purchase your school supplies. You behave, to all outside observers, exactly as an 11-year-old boy receiving his first introduction to the wizarding world ought to behave. You are surprised. You are delighted. You are wide-eyed and a little overwhelmed. He met Harry's eyes. You tell no one what you know. Not yet. Dumbledore will have eyes throughout the alley today, watching for your arrival. If he realizes the audit has occurred, he will move quickly to contain it. We need more time. Harry almost smiled. You want me to act like I don't know. I want you to let them believe they are still holding all the pieces, Ragnok said. Because once they know you have the board, the game changes. Can you get me everything? Harry asked. Not just the school list. Everything my vault holds. A full accounting. Inventory. Property. Everything. Ragnok studied him. That will take until this evening. I'll come back this evening, then. He stood up. In the marble hall outside, he could hear the distant sound of carts and the scratch of quills and the enormous, grinding business of a bank that had existed for centuries. He thought about 5,000 galleons every month and a sealed will and a man who had signed his name to his entire childhood. He thought about the letter pressed against his chest this morning. Ragnok, he said, at the door. The goblin looked up. The Weasleys, the parents took the money. They've been taking it for 10 years. He kept his voice very level. But the children. The younger ones especially. Do you know if they were aware? Ragnok considered this. Our records indicate the account payments went exclusively to the parents' joint account. Whether the children were informed would depend on what Arthur and Molly Weasley chose to tell them. Harry nodded slowly. That mattered. It mattered a lot, actually, which surprised him slightly, and then he remembered Sharpthorn's words. Emotional responses may be sharper than you are accustomed to. Apparently his capacity for nuance was already coming back. I'll see you this evening, he said. Diagon Alley on an ordinary summer morning was extraordinary. Harry walked through it for the first time with two things happening simultaneously in his head, genuine, unperformed amazement at everything he was seeing, and underneath that, running quietly like a second track, the constant analytical attention of someone who now knew that what looks like a gift is sometimes a leash. He went to Madame Malkin's first, because it was the first shop he found and because he needed robes. The woman was kind and efficient and didn't make conversation beyond measurements. Next to Harry in the fitting area was a pale boy with white blonde hair and a manner that suggested he had been told he was important so many times it had calcified into an actual personality. Hogwarts, too, the boy said. My father bought me the best broom. What about you? I haven't got a broom yet, Harry said. First years can't have them anyway. The boy seemed slightly annoyed to have deployed his best weapon to no effect. Do you know what house you'll be in? I don't know yet. I'll be in Slytherin. All my family have been. A pause, then, with slightly more calculation, do you know who you are? I mean, he glanced at Harry's forehead, at the fringe of dark hair that wasn't quite covering a scar, are you him? Harry considered this. I'm Harry Potter, he said simply. The boy blinked. For a moment something genuine flickered across his face, not malice, just startled interest. Draco Malfoy, he said. He held out his hand. Harry shook it. He didn't know yet if Draco Malfoy was someone who mattered. He didn't know if he was connected to any of Dumbledore's arrangements or just a separate piece of the world entirely. But the handshake was real, two boys meeting without ceremony or script, and Harry filed it away as a data point. At Flourish and Blots he spent 20 minutes over the school list and then another 20 buying books that weren't on it. A history of Gringotts and Goblin banking law. A comprehensive guide to wizarding inheritance rights. A book called Magical Cores, Development, Disruption, and Recovery. He paid for them with coins from a small emergency pouch Ragnok had provided, the first Potter money he'd ever spent, and tucked them in the bag with his textbooks. He got his wand last. Ollivander's shop was narrow and dusty and full of the sense of tremendous age, and Ollivander himself was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd spent his life in a room full of concentrated magic, pale, silver-eyed, very still, as though his capacity for ordinary movement had been redirected entirely into attention. Mr. Potter, Ollivander said. I wondered when I'd be seeing you. He didn't sound like he wondered about much. He sounded like a man waiting for a specific bus at a specific time. The process of finding Harry's wand was unlike anything he'd experienced, the measuring tape working on its own while Ollivander moved through the shelves, boxes flying open and being rejected, the strange discomfort of wands that almost worked and then didn't, the building tension of something approaching from a direction he couldn't see. And then the box Ollivander set on the counter with a particular care, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, and Harry picked it up and something happened that was less like this wand works and more like there you are. warmth flooding up his arm and through his chest and a scatter of red and gold sparks from the tip. But what struck him was Ollivander's expression. Not surprise, something more complicated. A kind of careful weighing. Curious, Ollivander said, as he always said. The phoenix whose feather is in your wand gave one other feather. Just one other. He looked at Harry with eyes that were very serious under the pale dreaming quality. It is very curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, gave you that scar. What happened to the other wand? Harry asked. It belongs to the one who gave you that scar. Ollivander held his gaze. I think we may expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. The question, he said softly, is for what purpose you will use them. My purpose, Harry said pleasantly. My own. Ollivander blinked. And then, slowly, he smiled, and it was not the smile of a man who had been told what he expected. It was the smile of a man who had been surprised by something better. He was back at Gringotts by 5 in the evening. Ragnok had the full accounting ready, a leather portfolio, thick as a dictionary, with a gold Potter crest pressed into the cover. Harry sat down and opened it and read without stopping for almost an hour while Ragnok worked at his desk and didn't interrupt. The Potter estate was enormous. He'd known, theoretically, from the first ledger, that his family had money. But the full picture was staggering: 3 properties, the family home in Godric's Hollow, destroyed, but the land still held, a manor in Wales, and a townhouse in London, investments in 3 different magical manufacturing companies, a charitable endowment fund, a secondary vault for family heirlooms and artifacts, and the trust account itself, which, even after £15 million had been siphoned out of it over 10 years, still held enough to be quietly extraordinary. There were also things he hadn't expected. A seat on the Hogwarts Board of Governors, attached to the Potter family name, that had been listed as inactive for 10 years, the seat empty, votes not cast. Lord Potter. He was, apparently, Lord Potter. He closed the portfolio and looked at Ragnok. I want Sirius Black investigated, Harry said. Not freed, I understand you can't do that unilaterally. But investigated. If Gringotts' audit already shows he was imprisoned without trial, that needs to be in the legal paperwork. It is already included in our submission to the Wizengamot, Ragnok said. It is a thread in the same fabric. Good. Harry paused. I want to reinstate the Hogwarts board seat. It will require you to formally claim the Potter lordship. You are technically old enough under Goblin law, though Ministry law prefers 17. What do I need to sign? Ragnok produced 3 more documents. Harry signed them. When he left Gringotts it was early evening, and Diagon Alley was turning golden in the summer light. He stood on the front steps for a moment with his bag of books and his new wand in his pocket and the thick portfolio under his arm, and he opened his mother's letter. The parchment was light and soft, and the ink was purple-black and slightly faded, and the handwriting was round and quick and full of compressed energy. Dear Harry. I hope, if you're reading this, that you're somewhere safe. I hope it's been a small adventure getting here, not a large one. I hope someone good put this in your hands. I won't tell you too much in a letter. Too many people open other people's letters. But I want you to know some things. You were wanted. Every single day of your life, you were wanted, by your father, who fell in love with you the moment he held you and never recovered, by me, who would have done anything in the world to see you grow up, and by a family that is larger and stranger and more wonderful than I can describe. Don't let anyone make you small. You were never designed to be small. Your father had a saying, James always had sayings, bless him, he thought they were very wise, and this one I actually agree with. He used to say, a Potter moves through the world like he belongs in it. He got that from his mother. She got it from hers. It goes back a long way. So move through the world like you belong in it, Harry. Because you do. We love you. That does not end. Mum. He read it twice. His eyes were dry, but something in his chest was doing something complex and pressurized, and he gave it a moment before he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the inside breast pocket of his shirt, over his sternum, where it pressed against him like something warm. Then he straightened up, adjusted the portfolio under his arm, and walked back down the alley. He had a train to catch in September. He had a school to walk into. And somewhere between now and then, he needed to decide exactly how to play what came next. He passed the window of Madame Malkin's, his new robes were already wrapped in brown paper in his bag, and caught his own reflection. 11 years old. Dark hair, green eyes, 2 big clothes. The scar, just barely visible under his fringe. He looked, he thought, exactly like what he was supposed to look like. That was the point. That night, he slept in the smallest bedroom at 4, Privet Drive for the last time. The Gringotts documents authorized a property transfer to the London townhouse that would take 3 weeks to process, but 3 weeks was all he needed. He'd submitted a formal complaint of financial mismanagement to Gringotts' legal arm, and by the time September came, the first Weasley notices would have been quietly issued. Vernon knocked on his door at 8 in the morning to tell him to get up and do the garden, not knowing that Harry had been awake since 5 reading a book about wizarding inheritance law by torchlight. In a minute, Harry said pleasantly. Vernon grunted and left, and Harry turned a page. On August 31st, he would take the train to Hogwarts with all the other first years, and he would walk into that castle, and Albus Dumbledore would look at him with those famously kind blue eyes and see Harry Potter, orphan, survivor, the boy who had been shaped so carefully for so long. He would see what Dumbledore expected to see. Harry intended to let him. Right up until the moment it was no longer useful to do so. He closed the book and stared at the ceiling and thought about a man signing his name to the same documents every 18 months for 10 years, absolutely certain he was doing what was necessary, absolutely certain the boy in the cupboard couldn't see the strings. He thought about how much had changed in a single day. Then Harry Potter, Lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter, 11 years old, sat up, put on his oversized shoes, and went to do the garden. Just like always. Chapter 2, The Weasley Problem. The last 3 weeks of August were the strangest of Harry's life, which continued to be saying something. He moved through the Dursleys' house like a ghost, quiet, present, unremarkable, while underneath the surface of his days something was happening that had no visible shape. Letters from Gringotts arrived every few days, tucked inside ordinary-looking envelopes with no return address, delivered not by owl but by a system of magical postal redirection that Ragnok had established specifically because Dumbledore monitored owl post into and out of Privet Drive. Harry read each one in the cupboard with his torch, then burned them carefully over the kitchen sink at 3 in the morning when everyone was asleep. The Wizengamot had received the first formal filing. The unsealing of the Potter will was under initial review. 3 ministry officials who had signed off on Sirius Black's imprisonment had been quietly notified that their signatures appeared in a Gringotts audit. The Weasley payments had stopped. None of this had surfaced publicly yet. Ragnok moved like water finding its way through rock, patient and inevitable and absolutely undetectable until the moment the stone gave way. Harry returned to Gringotts twice during those 3 weeks, taking the same 3 buses, arriving early enough that the alley was still quiet. 2 more sessions with Sharpthorn. The second was harder than the first. The compulsion charm ran deeper than she'd initially gauged, its roots tangled into his magical core like old ivy into brickwork. He came out of the chair shaking slightly, with a headache that lasted 2 days, and a strange new clarity that was sometimes wonderful and sometimes overwhelming. The third session produced the strangest effect of all. Afterward, sitting in Ragnok's office with tea he hadn't asked for but that had appeared anyway, Harry felt the loyalty suppression charm, just the outer layer. Sharpthorn warned, the inner anchor would take 1 more session, begin to lift. What came back was not dramatic. There was no flood of emotion, no sudden revelation. It was more like a room he'd been living in for years that had always been lit by a single small lamp, and someone had just opened the curtains. The same room. More visible. He thought about Ron Weasley, a boy he'd never met, and felt the absence of the pull he'd apparently been designed to feel. Ragnok had shown him the charm specification in the audit records, not a specific affection for any named individual, but a general predisposition toward the first strong social bond offered to him in the wizarding world, designed to activate upon first contact. A trap designed to feel like friendship. He also thought about Hermione Granger, whose name had appeared in a footnote of the audit report, another first-year, Muggle-born, no connection to Dumbledore's network, flagged by Gringotts' secondary sweep simply because she was on the Hogwarts register and Ragnok was being thorough. He'd read her name and felt something that wasn't manufactured at all. Just curiosity. He filed that away. On the 28th of August, 3 days before September 1st, he received a letter that wasn't from Gringotts. It was from Albus Dumbledore. The letter was warm, friendly, and precisely calibrated. Harry read it at the kitchen table while Petunia watched him from behind the kettle with the expression she always wore when something was happening that she didn't understand and couldn't prevent. "Dear Harry," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well and that the excitement of your upcoming start at Hogwarts is carrying you through the remaining days of summer. I write because I am aware this is an overwhelming time, entering the wizarding world for the first time is a large adventure, and I wanted you to know that there are people looking out for you." It continued in this vein for 2 paragraphs, warm and paternal, full of carefully placed reassurances. Then, near the end, "I have taken the liberty of arranging for you to meet the Weasley family at King's Cross on September 1st. They are a wonderful wizarding family who will be delighted to assist you in finding platform 9 3/4. Navigating the station for the first time can be confusing, and having guides who know the way will make your arrival much smoother. I have spoken with Molly Weasley personally, and she is tremendously looking forward to meeting you." Tremendously looking forward. Yes, Harry imagined she was. He folded the letter and tucked it in his pocket and went back to eating his toast. Petunia cleared her throat. "Who is it from?" "Someone from school," Harry said. She didn't ask again. He wrote back to Dumbledore that evening. His response was 3 sentences, "Thank you for thinking of me. I'll look forward to King's Cross. I hope the new year is going well at Hogwarts." Cheerful. Grateful. Completely unrevealing. He sent it by the owl that had delivered Dumbledore's letter, a magnificent bird that had waited on the windowsill with the patience of a trained professional, and watched it fly away until it was a speck against the evening sky. Then he went to his room, the actual bedroom now, not the cupboard. He'd moved himself in 2 weeks ago, and Vernon had made exactly 1 complaint before something in Harry's expression had stopped him, and opened the book on Wizarding Inheritance Law to the chapter on proxy authorization fraud. He read until midnight. September 1st arrived like a held breath releasing. Harry had his trunk packed. He'd been systematic about it, school things on one side, personal things on the other, the leather portfolio from Gringotts wrapped in a plain Muggle pillowcase and nestled at the bottom, the books he'd bought beyond the school list hidden under his folded robes. His wand in his jacket pocket, which he'd been carrying since the day he bought it, already familiar. He took the bus to London. Not the Dursleys' car, he hadn't asked, and they hadn't offered, which was fine. He didn't need them. He'd transferred 20 galleons to a Muggle bank card through a Gringotts exchange service, which Ragnok had arranged with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had clearly done this before for clients who needed to function in both worlds. He arrived at King's Cross at 10:15. Platform 9 3/4, according to the Hogwarts letter, was accessed somewhere between platforms 9 and 10. He found the barrier, examined it, and thought, a solid wall that isn't actually solid, designed to look impenetrable and isn't. Then he thought, metaphor. He walked through it at a steady pace and came out into the steam and noise of a different world. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet and enormous and beautiful in an utterly uncomplicated way. Harry stood on the platform for a moment and let himself feel it, the pull of it, the genuine unclouded excitement of a boy standing in front of something real and extraordinary that had nothing to do with any plan or manipulation. Just a train. Just magic. Just the beginning. He was loading his trunk when he heard it, not like that, Ginny, honestly, Ron, grabbed the other end. He turned around. The Weasley family was impossible to miss. Flaming red hair, every one of them, spilling across the platform in a scatter of trunks and owls and elbows and voices. The mother, Molly, was a broad, warm woman with a harried expression and the particular competent energy of someone who had spent 20 years managing chaos and was annoyed that it still required effort. Next to her was a man Harry assumed was Arthur, thin and balding, with an expression of permanent, delighted bewilderment. Several children of varying heights. And a boy Harry's own age with ears that stuck out slightly and a smear of something on his nose, looking around the platform with the honest, open curiosity of someone who hadn't yet been told that curiosity was suspicious. This was Ron. Harry watched him for a moment without moving closer. He was trying something Sharpthorn had described, a technique for testing what was real versus what was manufactured, now that the outer layer of the charm was down. He looked at Ron and catalogued what he actually felt: genuine interest, mild uncertainty, a sense of watchfulness. No magnetic pull. No artificial warmth. Just, a boy he hadn't met yet, who might or might not be worth knowing. That was clean. That was real. Then Molly's gaze swept the platform and landed on Harry, and he watched her face do something very complex in about half a second: recognition, warmth, calculation, and then the deliberate smoothing of all three into a purely maternal expression. She knew who he was. Immediately, without introduction, without hesitation. "Harry Potter," she said, crossing toward him with arms already spreading. "We've been looking for you, dear. I'm Molly Weasley, the boys have told me so much about you." Harry let himself be briefly hugged. It was brief. She felt his stillness and pulled back smoothly, and kept his expression open and pleasantly surprised. "I haven't met your boys yet, actually," he said with a slight smile. "I've only just arrived." A tiny pause. "Barely anything." "Of course. I meant, Albus mentioned you might need help with the barrier. I found it, thank you." Walked straight through. He shifted his gaze to the children behind her. "Are these all yours?" The deflection worked because it was genuine. Molly wanted him flustered and grateful, he was neither, so she adjusted to friendly introduction, which was the next arrow in the quiver. She gestured through her children with practiced ease: "Fred and George, the twins, don't let them sell you anything." The twins were tall, identical, and watching Harry with an attention that was different from the rest of the families. More actual. Less performed. "Percy, our prefect." Percy, with his badge catching the light, gave a very correct nod. "Ginny, my youngest." Ginny was small and red-faced and staring at him with an intensity he'd expected from adults in Diagon Alley, not from a 10-year-old girl. He smiled at her gently and she looked immediately away. "And Ron." Ron stuck out his hand. "All right," he said, the way people say all right as a greeting, not as a question. Harry shook it. "All right," he agreed. Ron grinned. It was a completely unguarded grin, lopsided and genuine, and Harry thought, this is the problem. Not that Ron was bad. Not that the grin was fake. The problem was that Ron had no idea. He was a boy who'd been told his whole life that being Harry Potter's friend was simply something that was going to happen, and he'd grown up with it the same way you grow up with any expectation long enough that you stop noticing it's there. That wasn't cruelty. That was something else, something that had no clean name. "Looking for a compartment?" Ron asked. "Sure," Harry said. They found a compartment 2 carriages back, and Ron settled in with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had done this many times. Harry took the window seat, put his bag overhead, and watched the platform through the glass as the train began to move. "First time?" Ron said. "First time," Harry confirmed. "Mental, isn't it, the first time you see all of this?" Ron was already pulling sweets from a paper bag. "Mum worries I've grown up too used to magic to be properly impressed by it." "I think she's wrong, I think there's stuff that stays impressive no matter what." He offered Harry a chocolate frog. "I've got all the cards except Ptolemy." "Do you collect them?" "I don't know what they are yet," Harry said honestly. "Right. Ron immediately brightened with the energy of someone who has just been handed a very pleasant task. Okay, so, he explained chocolate frogs for 10 minutes with a thoroughness that was genuinely engaging. Harry listened, asked questions that were real questions, and felt something that was also real. Ron Weasley was entertaining company. He was funny and enthusiastic and had a complete lack of social performance. What you saw was what he had. When he said something was brilliant, he meant it. When he was confused, his face said so without consultation. That was the thing, Harry thought. The tragedy of it, if tragedy was the right word. Ron would probably have liked him anyway. Not because of a plan or a payment, just because they were two boys of the same age on the same train going to the same school, and that was often enough. He thought about 5,000 galleons a month and decided he needed to know more before he decided what to do about it. Tell me about your family, Harry said, because it was natural and because he needed the information and because both reasons could coexist without either being dishonest. Ron shrugged easily. 6 kids. Dad works at the Ministry, Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, which is actually brilliant, but the Ministry treats it like a joke, which annoys Mum. We haven't got much money, which I know because Mum mentions it approximately, he counted on his fingers, constantly. But it's fine, really. The house is good. The food's good. Fred and George are, he paused, apparently searching for the right classification, a natural disaster in human form, but you get used to them. Percy's Percy. Ginny's all right when she's not being weird. What does your mum think about you going to Hogwarts with me? Harry asked, keeping his voice casual, watching the hills roll past outside. Ron didn't even blink. She thinks it's brilliant. She's been talking about it since forever, really. I think she always just sort of assumed we'd end up in the same year. He reached for another frog. Why? Just curious, Harry said. I hadn't met anyone from the wizarding world before. I wondered how much people knew about me in advance. Everyone knows about you, Ron said matter-of-factly. Like, everyone. You're in all the history books. The boy who defeated you-know-who. No one in the wizarding world doesn't know who Harry Potter is. He seemed to hear how this might land and added, which is probably weird for you, right? Sorry. I'm getting used to it, Harry said. Around Peterborough, Fred and George appeared in the doorway, hanging off the frame with identical expressions of assessment. So you're actually him, one of them said. Harry had already decided to distinguish them by a small burned scar on the left wrist of one, Fred, he'd learn, and by the fact that the other one always looked approximately 1 second ahead of his brother. Apparently, Harry said. Does it hurt? The other one, George, asked, gesturing vaguely at his own forehead. Not really. Sometimes when it rains. So you're basically a barometer, Fred said. You found a practical application I hadn't considered. The twins exchanged a look that was entirely silent and lasted about a quarter of a second. Then they both grinned, different from Ron's grin, sharper, more evaluative, and came the rest of the way into the compartment. Room for 2 more. George said. More the merrier, Harry said, which was true, because the more of them he spent time with, the more he understood. The twins were not playing a role. Nothing about them felt scripted. They were genuinely interested in Harry the same way they would have been genuinely interested in anyone interesting, because they found people interesting when people were worth finding interesting. He was a data point in their ongoing assessment of the world, not a goal. They were also, he noticed within about 5 minutes, genuinely funny. Question, Fred said, lounging across the seat with his long legs over George's. What do you know about the wizarding world? Not much, Harry said. Which was true of some things and untrue of others. Okay, so do you know about, Fred, George said, and something in his tone made Harry look at him more closely. George was watching Harry with a subtle attention that was different from the easy performance of his conversation. He'd caught something, a flicker, maybe, in the way Harry had answered. He was smart enough to notice and smart enough not to push it. He filed it away. Harry could see him do it. Interesting, Harry thought. The conversation moved on. Harry learned things. The twins were planning a business venture that their mother called irresponsible and that sounded genuinely brilliant. Percy had ambitions for the ministry that were entirely his own and slightly annoying. The Weasley family home, the Burrow, was held together partly by Molly's organizational force and partly by structural spells that Arthur refreshed every spring. None of this was performance. It was just people being people, which Harry found he could watch now with a clarity that was simultaneously very good and occasionally quite painful, because clarity is painful when you've spent a long time not having it. When Fred and George drifted back to their own compartment and Ron fell asleep with his mouth slightly open and his second-hand dress robe sliding off his knee, Harry sat alone with his thoughts and the dark hills going by outside. He thought about the Burrow. He thought about Molly Weasley's face on the platform. He thought about how much of what he'd seen today was real and how much was architecture. He made a decision. The feast that night was extraordinary. The Sorting Hat was extraordinary. The great hall with its floating candles and enchanted ceiling and 4 long tables and the faces of 100 children turned upward in the firelight was extraordinary. Harry let himself feel all of it. He'd earned the right to. He was sorted into Gryffindor. The hat sat on his head for 11 seconds, which several watching students would later describe as a near miss for Slytherin, which was incorrect. The hat had offered him a choice and he'd made one, cleanly and without drama. He took the cheers from the Gryffindor table, found a seat, and immediately began cataloguing the room. He found Hermione Granger at the Gryffindor table 3 seats down, sitting very straight, the flush of her sorting still in her cheeks. She had brown eyes that were currently consuming the feast with the same energy she'd apparently brought to every book she'd ever read. When their eyes met briefly she gave him a slightly uncertain nod, as though she'd intended to introduce herself but wasn't sure of the protocol. He nodded back. Later, he thought. Dumbledore sat at the staff table at the front of the hall, and Harry had been preparing for this moment since Ragnok's office, and still it surprised him. The man was insufficient. He radiated a kind of weight that had nothing to do with physical presence. Long white beard, half-moon glasses, robes that managed to be extravagant and dignified simultaneously. And the eyes, blue, vivid, with the particular quality of someone who had spent 80 years paying complete attention and still found the world surprising. He looked at the room with the expression of a man who loved it, genuinely, without affectation, and for a moment Harry saw exactly what made Albus Dumbledore so dangerous. He was not a cold man. He was not calculating in the way a villain is calculating, clicking through options without feeling. He was a man of extraordinary warmth and intelligence who had made a series of decisions he believed were necessary, and the warmth was real, and the necessity was real to him, and the combination of the two was what made it so completely, almost perfectly terrible. Because a cold man you can simply oppose. A cold man signs his name to your stolen childhood and doesn't feel it. A warm man signs his name to your stolen childhood and sleeps soundly, because he has already calculated that the alternative was worse. Dumbledore's gaze swept the hall and found Harry at the Gryffindor table, and his face did exactly what Harry had predicted, a quiet, private pleasure, like a gardener checking on something he'd been cultivating. He hadn't expected to see Harry at all today, hadn't known about the visit to Gringotts, had assumed his letter arranging the meeting with the Weasleys at King's Cross had been the first contact, had probably spent the journey from King's Cross satisfied that his arrangements were proceeding normally. Harry gave Dumbledore a wide-eyed, slightly awed look from 30 feet away. Dumbledore smiled, warm and grandfatherly. Harry smiled back. 3 days into term, Harry visited Hermione. He found her in the library on a Wednesday evening, surrounded by books she didn't need yet, reading with her legs tucked underneath her and her quill already in motion on a piece of parchment. She didn't look up when he sat down across from her, which he respected enormously. He waited. After about 30 seconds she looked up, registered him, and said, "You wanted to talk to me." "I did," Harry said. "How did you know where I'd be?" "You're in the library every evening. You were here Monday and Tuesday." Wednesday was a reasonable inference. She studied him with narrowed eyes that were doing rapid computation. What do you want? I wanted to introduce myself properly. We haven't spoken, even though we're in the same house and some of the same classes. He paused. I also wanted to ask you something. Ask it, then. If you found out that a person in authority had been doing something deliberately wrong for a very long time, and you had proof, but acting on the proof too quickly would let them hide the evidence, what would you do? She stared at him. Is this hypothetical? Not entirely. She put her quill down very slowly. How serious is the thing they've been doing? Serious enough that it's affected several people's lives significantly. Including mine. Including yours. She processed this for a moment with the focused attention of someone who treated information as a serious responsibility. Then I'd want to understand the full scope first. Because if you move too quickly you might win the battle and lose everything else, you'd give the person a chance to frame the narrative before you could establish the facts. She tilted her head. Who taught you to think about this strategically? Most people just react. I've been reading, Harry said honestly. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she uncurled her legs and sat forward. You're Harry Potter and you've been reading Wizarding Inheritance Law and you have a problem with someone in authority that you're treating as a long game. She said it like she was reading it off a list. That's what you're telling me. More or less, Harry said. I'm in, Hermione said. Obviously. Harry blinked. He hadn't expected that particular speed. You haven't heard the details yet. I can tell the details are significant from the way you framed the question. If you're wrong, I'll tell you. If you're right, I'll help. She picked her quill back up. I won't ask you to tell me everything at once, but I want to understand enough to be useful rather than just being your audience. That's exactly what I want, Harry said. Good, she said. Now, do you want to tell me why you've been performing slightly less capability in transfiguration than you actually have? He went very still. What makes you think that? You solve the problems correctly and then look at your answer with this half-second pause before you write it down. Like you're checking whether it's too fast. She tilted her head again. You don't have to perform being ordinary for me. I do it too, sometimes, and I find it exhausting. Harry sat with that for a moment. Then he said, I'll stop if you stop. For the first time since he'd sat down, Hermione Granger smiled, quick, genuine, slightly surprised at herself. Deal, she said. 2 weeks into term, Harry went to the Burrow. He hadn't been invited, not exactly. Ron had mentioned it casually one morning at breakfast, the way you mention places you go regularly, and Harry had said he'd like to see it sometime, and Ron had said why not this weekend. His mum was always happy to have people over. Harry had said great. Ron had sent a letter home. A reply had come back by noon, Molly Weasley's handwriting, large and emphatic, saying of course, they'd love to have Harry, he was welcome any time. He was welcome any time. He bet he was. They arrived on Saturday afternoon via Floo. Harry's first attempt at Floo travel was genuinely terrible. He came out in the Burrow's kitchen covered in ash and heading in the wrong direction, which was at least partly an act, though not entirely, because Floo turned out to be exactly as disorienting as advertised. The Burrow was everything Ron's description had suggested, a house that had apparently been added to repeatedly over many years by someone who cared more about the adding than about structural coherence. It leaned. It was warm and cluttered and full of the smell of cooking and old wood and something Percy would later identify as the degenoming potion Arthur kept in the back garden shed. Every surface had something on it, clocks and knitting needles and photographs and magazines and a wireless in the corner playing music that Harry would later learn was the wizarding equivalent of Radio 4 but livelier. He loved it immediately, and hated that he did, and then decided that loving it and knowing what he knew were not mutually exclusive. Molly was in the kitchen and turned to him with a smile that was wide and genuine and 10% something else. She hugged him, longer this time, with her hands on his shoulders as she pulled back, looking at his face with something that landed between maternal satisfaction and assessment. "Look at you," she said warmly. "Are you eating enough? You're thin as a rail." "I've been fine," Harry said pleasantly. "This house is incredible." Which it was. He wasn't lying. He spent the day being fully present, helping degnome the garden with Ron and the twins. Gnomes were more entertaining than any book had suggested, small and leathery and furious, spinning satisfyingly through the air, eating an enormous lunch that Molly produced with the casual mastery of someone who cooked for 9 people as a matter of course, sitting in the garden in the afternoon sun while Arthur asked him earnest questions about Muggle technology with a delight that had nothing false in it whatsoever. Arthur was the hardest one to look at clearly. Because Arthur Weasley was, Harry chose the word deliberately, good. Not uncomplicated, not without fault, but genuinely good in the way that some people simply are, the way it's embedded in them before their choices can change it. He'd taken the money. Probably told himself reasons. Probably believed the reasons. Still took the money. Harry didn't let himself soften around that, but he also didn't let himself harden where hardness wasn't accurate. Fred and George cornered him in the garden at 4 o'clock, when Ron had gone inside for something and Arthur was back at his shed. "So," Fred said. "So," Harry said. George sat down in the garden chair with the ease of someone settling in for a proper conversation. "We've been watching you," he said, without preamble. "You spend a lot of time watching people." "I'm new to all of this," Harry said. "It's interesting." "Sure," Fred said. "You're also doing something with our little brother that we can't quite put our finger on." Harry met his eyes. "I like Ron," he said, and meant it. "I'm figuring out what kind of friendship that means. That's all." "What kind it means," George echoed slowly. "He's got a good heart," Harry said. "That's real." I'm not playing him, if that's what you're worried about." The twins looked at him for a moment. Not suspicious, exactly. More like they were deciding whether to say something. "Our mum," George said finally, in a careful voice, "has been excited about you coming to Hogwarts for a long time. Longer than seems normal." Harry waited. "We don't know why," Fred said. "We've asked." She deflects. It never sat quite right. He turned a garden gnome over in his hands, they'd missed one in the degnoming, with a thoughtful expression. "We're not asking you to explain it. We're just telling you that if something is going on that involves this family, we'd rather know than not." Harry studied them both for a long moment. The twins were 19 months from their OWLS, 15 years old, sharp enough to have already noticed something was off, honest enough to say so directly, and clearly the only members of the immediate Weasley family he wasn't going to need to be cautious with. He chose his words carefully. "I'm looking into some things," he said. "When I know more, I'll tell you what I can." He looked at Fred. "I promise that if it involves your family, you'll hear it from me, not from someone else." Fred held his gaze, then nodded once. "That's good enough for now." "For now," George agreed. The gnome bit Fred on the thumb and was flung into the hedge, and the moment broke cleanly into something ordinary. Dinner was enormous and chaotic and full of people talking over each other in the cheerful way of families that have always done exactly that. Harry sat between Ron and Ginny and ate more than he had at any meal since arriving at Hogwarts, and watched. Molly served. She served Harry specifically with the focused attention of someone who had been looking forward to it. Not cruel, not cold, warm, even. She asked him questions about Hogwarts. She laughed at his answers. She passed him more potatoes before he'd finished the first serving. And all the while her eyes checked in on him in a way that was not quite maternal because maternal attention more actions request aborted right the next chapter now. Chapter 3, First Day. Last illusion. The Hogwarts Express arrived at Hogsmeade Station at dusk, and Harry's first sight of the castle was from a boat on a black lake. He sat in the stern with Neville Longbottom, whom he'd met on the platform at Hogsmeade after Neville had stepped on someone's toad and needed to apologize to 4 different people before they'd walked 30 feet. Neville was round-faced and earnest and apologized the way some people breathe, automatically, before he'd assessed whether it was necessary. He was also, Harry had noticed within about 2 minutes, watching the castle with an expression that wasn't wonder. It was something older. Something that had been told it wasn't allowed. "You've seen it before?" Harry asked. Neville startled slightly. "What?" "No, never been." He paused. "My gran talks about it. She was here. My dad was here." He stopped on the word was in the way people stop when a word means more than it says. Harry had read enough by now to know about the Longbottoms. Frank and Alice Longbottom, Aurors, tortured into permanent incapacity by Bellatrix Lestrange's group 4 days after Voldemort's fall. Their son raised by Augusta Longbottom, who by all accounts was a woman of iron certainty and limited warmth, who had spent a decade being disappointed that Neville was not his father and communicating this disappointment with quiet, relentless efficiency. "You're going to be good at this," Harry said. Neville blinked at him. "What makes you say that?" "Because you actually care about it." Harry nodded toward the castle. "Half the kids on this boat think it's exciting like a theme park. You think it's real?" Neville looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was trying very hard not to be hopeful. "I failed most of my primary school things," he said. "My gran says I might have got my dad's magic late, or that I might be, she says I might not be much, magically." He seemed to hear himself say this to a stranger and flinched slightly. "Sorry. Your gran sounds like she's wrong," Harry said. The boat touched the bank, and the castle filled the whole sky above them, and Neville closed his mouth and looked up at it with his jaw set and something burning quietly behind his eyes that Harry recognized because he'd felt it himself, the specific determination of someone who has been told what they are and is no longer interested in accepting the verdict. They walked up to the castle together. The sorting was what it was. Harry had been thinking about it since Gringotts, specifically thinking about which house served his purposes best, which was a thought that felt slightly cold when he had it and that he'd examined from several angles before deciding it wasn't cold, it was just honest. He was not a blank boy walking into a blank future. He was a boy with specific goals and specific enemies and specific things to protect, and those things had implications. The hat sat on his head and immediately went quiet in a way Harry suspected was unusual. Then it said, inside his skull in a voice that was like hearing your own thoughts but with better diction, "Well. You've been doing your homework." Some of it, Harry thought back. You could be in any of them. You know that. Slytherin would serve your ambitions. Yes, I see those. Don't look so composed, you're 11 and angry and you've got every right to be. Ravenclaw would suit your mind. Hufflepuff would make people underestimate me, Harry thought, and then felt slightly ashamed of thinking it. Yes, the hat agreed, without judgment. Gryffindor gives you the thing you actually need most right now, which isn't strategic advantage or intellectual company. What you need most right now is people. You need to be surrounded by the kind of people who run toward things instead of away from them. You've been alone for 11 years in ways that have nothing to do with the number of humans in the house. Harry sat with that. Gryffindor, he said. I thought so, said the hat, with something that might have been satisfaction. And then, in a tone that was different from everything before it, quieter and more serious, Harry. The things coming, the things already in motion, be careful not to let strategy replace feeling. You'll need both. The feeling is not a weakness. I know, Harry said. And meant it. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The cheering from the table was genuine and enormous, and Harry walked to it through a hall full of faces he didn't know yet and sat down and looked up at the enchanted ceiling, which showed a sky full of early stars, and thought, all right, then. Here we go. Hermione was sorted 4 names later and landed at Gryffindor with a combination of relief and fierce satisfaction. She sat down 2 places from Harry, met his eyes, and gave him a nod that meant good, and Harry nodded back. Neville came after and the hat took a while, nearly 40 seconds, long enough that the hall went quiet with the particular attention crowds give to uncertainty. Then, Gryffindor, and Neville walked to the table like he'd been given something he hadn't expected and was afraid to look at it directly. He sat down next to Harry. "Good," Harry said quietly. Neville looked at him sideways and said nothing, but something in his shoulders settled. The first morning of classes fell on a Thursday, and defense against the dark arts was the first lesson. Professor Quirrell was a man so aggressively mild that Harry's attention kept sliding off him in the same way his eyes had initially slid past the leaky cauldron, which he filed away as potentially interesting. The stutter was pronounced and the nervous energy was constant and the turban was enormous and smelled of garlic. Harry sat in the second row, listened attentively, took neat notes, and thought about the back of Quirrell's head. Transfiguration was Professor McGonagall, who arrived in the classroom as a cat sitting on the teacher's desk and transformed into herself without ceremony, which was the best possible opening to any lesson ever. Harry decided within 5 minutes that she was someone he needed to be on the right side of, not because she was powerful, though she was, but because she was profoundly fair, and fair people were rare and valuable. He and Hermione had agreed, quietly, to perform at slightly above average in most classes for the first few weeks. Not dramatically below their actual ability, that would be obvious. Just not first. Just not immediately extraordinary. Hermione had suggested it and then looked pained at herself, and Harry had said, "It's not dishonest. It's just pacing," and she'd said, "I know. I still don't love it," and he'd said, "I don't either. We'll stop once we understand the room better," and she'd nodded. They stopped after 2 weeks, because the room understood itself fine and didn't need their protection. The moment it ended was in Transfiguration. McGonagall had set them to turning matchsticks into needles, a task most of the class was struggling with. Harry had done it cleanly on the second attempt and then the second clean attempt felt dishonest in a way that sat badly, so on the third he stopped thinking about pacing and just did it, and the matchstick became a needle that was as perfect as geometry, and McGonagall walked past his desk, stopped, picked it up, examined it, and held it up for the class to see. "This is the standard you should all be aiming for," she said. Hermione, next to him, turned hers into a needle approximately 4 seconds later that was arguably better. McGonagall gave them both a look that was not quite a smile and was better than most smiles. After that they stopped performing. Potions was Snape. Harry had known about Severus Snape from the audit documents in a way that was not detailed but was suggestive. Snape had been a Death Eater, had turned informant before the fall, had been pardoned on Dumbledore's testimony and given the potions professorship as a consequence of that testimony. He was, as far as Harry could tell, in a complicated and presumably miserable arrangement whereby he owed Dumbledore his freedom and his livelihood and possibly his life, and men in arrangements like that either become loyal or become resentful or become, most dangerously, both. He walked into the dungeon classroom and took a seat in the middle of the room, not the front, not the back, and looked at the man at the front with open, attentive neutrality. Snape's gaze went around the room during his opening remarks with the sweeping assessment of someone who had made preliminary judgments about each new class before they'd sat down. It arrived at Harry, paused very briefly in the way eyes pause when they find what they expected, and then narrowed in the way eyes narrow when what they expected has come with an unexpected quality. "Potter," Snape said. "Our new celebrity." "Professor," Harry replied. Evenly. No defensiveness, no performance. Snape's eyes went very slightly still. He'd been expecting something, embarrassment, maybe, or attempted defiance. Neither came. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known in the wizarding world. The specific addition sequence you're describing produces a more refined variant than the standard recipe." A beat of silence. "Indeed," Snape said, in a tone that had shifted by a quarter step, recalibrating, "same as Ragnok had done, same as Ollivander." "Where did you read that?" "Advanced Potion Making by Libacious Borage, and a supplementary text by Damocles Belby on sleeping potion variants. Both are in the Hogwarts library." You've been in the library for 2 days. I read quickly. The class was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment with an expression that Harry couldn't fully read, part contempt, part something more complicated that might have been his father's face making Snape's memory sit badly, or might have been simple recalculation of an assumption. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, like the words tasted strange. For preparation. He moved on. After class, Hermione fell into step beside Harry in the corridor and said, he was going to take points. I know, Harry said. You robbed him of the excuse before he could make it. That's one way to put it. She considered this. He's going to find other excuses. Probably, Harry agreed. But it establishes something. He knows now that I'm not a blank page. He'll recalibrate accordingly. He paused. He's not entirely an enemy, either. I'm not sure yet. Hermione shot him a sideways look. You have a very unusual way of thinking about enemies. I try not to decide what someone is before I know what they want, Harry said. Wanting and doing are sometimes different. She thought about this for a moment. That's either very wise or very dangerous. Maybe both, Harry said. She seemed to find this answer satisfying and pulled out her transfiguration notes. 2 weeks in, Harry sought out Neville. He found him in the Gryffindor common room on a Sunday, alone at a table near the window with his herbology textbook open and his face set in the expression of someone trying very hard to force information into a brain that keeps insisting it has somewhere else to be. His cauldron had exploded twice in potions, the second time Snape had given him such a detailed, measured inventory of his failures that half the class had gone quiet and the other half had looked away, and Neville was the particular kind of person who internalizes cruelty with the efficiency of someone who's been told it's deserved. Harry sat down across from him without preamble. Show me where you're stuck, he said. Neville looked up with an expression of mild surprise and significant wariness. What? Herbology. Show me where you're stuck. I'm not, this is just reading. You've read the same page 4 times, Harry said. I've been watching from the stairs. Neville looked faintly mortified. I remember things better when I read them twice, he said, with the tone of someone offering a defense they don't believe in. Or maybe the way the textbook explains it isn't the way your brain takes it in. Harry turned the book toward himself and read the page. It was dense, technical, organized around classification systems. Do you think better in pictures or in patterns? What? When you're in the greenhouse, do you remember the plants by what they look like or by how they're grouped? Neville blinked. By what they look like. And smell like. I know fanged geraniums because they smell wrong before they bite you. Right. Harry pushed the book back, pulled out a piece of parchment, and said, describe them to me. Don't read them off the page, just tell me what you know. And when Neville started talking about plants, haltingly at first and then with gathering confidence and then with actual enthusiasm, pulling specific details from a memory that was clearly very good when it was allowed to work in its natural direction, Harry listened and occasionally asked questions and let the pattern emerge. By the end of an hour, Neville had covered 3 chapters without once looking like he was suffering. You know all of this, Harry said. I know the plants, Neville said, in a tone that suggested he was processing something uncomfortable. The theory, you just explained the theory to me for an hour. You explained the classification system by using the plants as examples, which is exactly how the theory works. Your brain just needed the concrete to come first. Neville stared at the parchment full of notes they'd made together. My gran's been saying I'm not as magical as my dad he stopped. She's wrong, Harry said. He said it the same way he'd said it in the boat, not reassurance, just statement of fact. What your dad was like at 11 has no bearing on what you're like at 11. And anyway, he paused, because this was important and he wanted to say it right, I've been watching you in classes. When you forget that you're supposed to be bad at something, you're not bad at it. You're actually quite good. Neville's face went through several things at once. Harry gave it space. My Gran means well, Neville said finally, quietly, in the tone of someone saying it as much to themselves as to anyone else. I'm sure she does, Harry said, which was not the same as she's right, and Neville heard the difference. They worked for another hour. When Hermione came downstairs from the girls' dormitory and saw them at the table, she pulled a chair over without asking and joined them, which Neville seemed startled by, and then settled into, and then was clearly glad of. The three of them sat together in the warm common room while the fire burned down and the autumn dark pressed against the windows, and it was not a plan or a strategy. It was just, this. 3 11-year-olds becoming something. Harry let it be exactly what it was. The thing with the broomsticks happened the way some pivotal things happen, out of nowhere, during a class, without warning. Madame Hooch's flying lesson was a practical session that Harry had genuinely been looking forward to, partly because flying sounded extraordinary and partly because physical things were less easily modulated than academic ones. When he mounted the broom and kicked off from the ground, two things happened simultaneously. The broom shot upward with a responsiveness that felt like it recognized him, and Harry thought, oh, in the way you think oh when something you've never done turns out to be something your body already knows. He pulled up at 20 feet and hovered and thought, I could go higher. Then he looked down at Madame Hooch's expression and went back to 20 feet and stayed there. What happened with Neville happened in his peripheral vision, the broom jerking sideways in the wind, Neville's nervous grip overcorrecting, the slow terrible arc upward and then outward and then the fall and the crack that meant something was broken, and Hooch taking Neville to the hospital wing with instructions for everyone to stay on the ground. Draco Malfoy was already moving before Hooch's footsteps faded. He picked up the remembrall that had fallen from Neville's hand, turned it over with the kind of casual possession that isn't really about the object at all, and said something about whether Neville had perhaps remembered something about not being able to fly, and the group of Slytherins around him laughed in the way groups laugh when their leader expects it. Harry watched him from 4 feet away. Draco looked up and met his eyes. There was something in Draco's face that Harry had seen before, the display of confidence that lives just over the top of something less comfortable. He didn't look cruel, exactly. He looked like someone who had been given cruelty as a social tool and was using it because that was what you did in situations like this. Give it back, Harry said. Not loudly. Not threateningly. Just, said it. Draco's eyes sharpened. Make me. Harry got on his broom. He wasn't angry. That was the interesting thing. Later, sitting in McGonagall's office waiting for the punishment he wasn't going to receive, he would think about how he'd felt in that moment and find that it wasn't anger. It was clarity. He was on a broom because Draco Malfoy had decided that picking up a helpless boy's possession while a teacher wasn't watching was an appropriate exercise of power, and Harry wasn't interested in that being the established dynamic, and the most direct way to address it was this. He flew. It was, he had no comparison. The broom knew exactly what he wanted before he'd fully decided he wanted it. He went from standing to 40 feet in the air in under 3 seconds, and it felt like breathing felt, like something so natural that the only strange thing is that you haven't been doing it since birth. Draco threw the remembrall, threw it high and far, which was either confidence or desperation, and Harry went after it without thought, dropping in a near vertical dive that made several watching students shout, pulling up so close to the ground that he could feel the grass, the remembrall perfectly caught in his right fist. He landed and straightened up and held the remembrall. The silence on the lawn was brief and complete. McGonagall appeared from the castle doors at the speed of someone who had been watching from a window and said, Potter. With me. Her voice was entirely controlled, which was a different thing from calm. He followed her inside and up 2 flights of stairs to her office, where she told him to sit down and then stood behind her desk for a moment with her back to him. When she turned around, her expression was doing something complicated. You could have been killed, she said. Respectfully, no, Harry said. I wasn't in danger at any point in that dive. The pull-out was controlled. You are 11 years old and you have been on a broom twice. Once, before today, briefly. But, he stopped, because the honest answer, it felt like I've been doing it my whole life, sounded simultaneously true and like exactly the kind of thing an overconfident child says. I'm sorry for breaking the rules. That was genuinely my fault. Draco had Neville's remembrall, but the right thing to have done was to go to you about it, not respond by getting on a broom. McGonagall stared at him. That is the most rational apology I have received from a student in approximately 15 years. I mean it, Harry said. I don't have a problem with rules generally. I have a problem with that specific situation. Nevertheless. She sat down, picked up a piece of parchment, put it down, and said, I have spoken with Madame Hooch. She confirms your airmanship was unusual. Exceptional, is the word she used. A pause. I have also spoken with Oliver Wood. Oliver Wood, Harry knew from 2 weeks of common room observation, was the Gryffindor Quidditch captain and a person whose entire existence appeared organized around a single game. I won't be playing Quidditch, Harry said. McGonagall blinked. I beg your pardon. First years aren't allowed. I broke the rules to fly today and I'm not going to benefit from breaking the rules. He met her eyes steadily. I'd like to be considered for next year's team, if Wood is willing to wait. But this year, no. The rules exist for reasons. The silence was very long. McGonagall picked up her parchment again. I will communicate that to Oliver, she said, and I expect he will be extremely frustrated. Another pause. I am taking 5 points from Gryffindor for the unsanctioned flight. That's fair, Harry said. Do not make it a habit. I won't. He stood to go. At the door, McGonagall said, Potter. He turned. She was looking at him with the same expression she'd worn when she held up his perfect needle, the assessing quality of a person recalibrating an expectation. Your father, she said carefully, was the best natural flyer I had seen in 30 years of teaching. A pause. I hope you will forgive me for saying that what I saw today was better. Harry held her gaze for a moment. I didn't know him, he said. But I appreciate you saying so. He went back to the common room and didn't mention any of it. Wood found him that evening and sulked spectacularly at the news about Quidditch. Next year, Harry said. Next year, Wood groaned, like it was a death sentence. The morning Dumbledore first spoke to him privately arrived on a Tuesday in mid-October, 3 weeks before Halloween. Harry had been expecting it, was, in fact, surprised it hadn't come sooner. He was leaving the Great Hall after breakfast when Dumbledore appeared at his elbow with the easy materialization of someone who moves through institutions he owns, and Hogwarts was Dumbledore's, in every way that mattered except on paper. He walked beside Harry for 3 steps before speaking, which was a technique Harry recognized, establish physical proximity before words, so the conversation feels like it was already happening. Harry, Dumbledore said. Do you have a moment to walk with me? Of course, Harry said. They went through a side corridor and up a short flight of stairs to a narrow window seat overlooking the lake. Dumbledore sat with the ease of a man who owns the furniture and gestured to the seat across. Harry sat. This close, Dumbledore was more, Harry needed a moment to find the word. More present. Not threatening, just genuinely there, in a way that most people weren't. His attention when it landed on you was complete. You felt seen in a way that was probably why generations of students trusted him absolutely. Harry let himself feel it and noted it and did not let it change anything. I wanted to check in, Dumbledore said, with warmth that was entirely unperformed. This was the worst part, the warmth was real. Settling in well. I understand your transfiguration work has been quite impressive. I enjoy it, Harry said truthfully. And you've made some good friends, it seems. Miss Granger, young Mr. Longbottom. The blue eyes were attentive behind the half-moon glasses. And you've connected with the Weasley family. I understand you visited the Burrow last month. I did. They're very kind. Harry kept his voice warm and easy. Ron and I get on well. I'm so glad, Dumbledore said, and the gladness was textured, layered with a relief he wasn't fully concealing. The Weasleys are one of the finest families I know. Salt of the earth, all of them. Molly in particular, she is a remarkable woman. She's a wonderful cook, Harry agreed. Dumbledore smiled. She is that. He looked out at the lake for a moment. Harry, I want you to know that I think of your well-being very seriously. If there is ever anything troubling you, anything about the wizarding world that confuses you, or anything from your past that weighs on you, my door is always open. I have known your parents, and I feel a particular, he paused, chose the word deliberately, responsibility for your happiness. Harry looked at him. At the kind eyes and the long white beard and the hands that had signed his name to a decade's worth of documents. At the man who had buried his parents' will and put him in a cupboard and paid a family to befriend him and called it responsibility. He felt the sorting hat's words come back to him, the feeling is not a weakness. Thank you, Harry said. That means a lot. He let it sit in the air between them, warm, grateful, completely opaque. Dumbledore looked at him with those extraordinary eyes, and for just a moment, half a second, something shifted in them. Not suspicion. More like the feeling of reading a page and knowing you've understood the words but not quite reached what they mean. He said nothing more about it. The conversation moved on to Quidditch, to the castle's history, to small and pleasant things, and Dumbledore was charming and interested and full of the kind of anecdotes that made you feel like you were being trusted with something, and Harry listened and responded and gave back exactly as much as he intended and not a fraction more. When they parted at the corridor junction, Dumbledore placed a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. My door, he said again. I'll remember, Harry said. He walked back toward Gryffindor Tower and took a route that went through a corridor on the third floor, because he'd been using unused corridors to think since his second day. At the far end of this particular corridor there was a door that was locked, and above the door was a sign saying the corridor was forbidden. Harry had been past it 4 times without stopping. Today he stopped. Not because he wanted to go through it. Because Dumbledore had just sat across from him and looked into his eyes and seen a grateful 11-year-old, and in the 2 minutes it had taken to walk to this corridor Harry had done the arithmetic on the conversation and found something that didn't fit. The relief when Harry mentioned the Burrow visit. The gratitude that Ron and I get on well. The careful, almost eager interest in confirming that Harry's Wizarding World social formation was going according to plan. The Weasley payments had stopped on his birthday in July. 3 months ago. If Dumbledore knew the payments had stopped, he'd know something had disrupted the arrangement, the audit, the Gringotts intervention. He'd be alarmed. He'd be moving to investigate. But he wasn't alarmed. He was relieved. Which meant he didn't know. Which meant the stopped payments hadn't reached him yet, or he'd been told another reason, a cover story Ragnok had planted. Harry made a note to ask Ragnok about this at his next session. And if Dumbledore didn't know the payments had stopped, if he still believed the arrangement was running smoothly, then the relief was real. He genuinely thought it was working. He'd sat there and looked at Harry walking into the school friendly with Ron Weasley and thought, it's going as planned. Harry turned that over in his mind. Let him think so. Let him watch the arrangements he'd built appear to function exactly as intended. He was still watching the locked door at the end of the corridor, its sign, its darkness beyond. There was something on the other side. Something Dumbledore wanted kept from a first year. He filed it away, turned around, and walked back toward the tower. The 4th session with Sharpthorn was scheduled for the Christmas holidays. After it, the loyalty charm would be fully cleared. He'd be entirely himself, unedited, unmanaged, complete. He was looking forward to it in a way he didn't have language for yet. The night of the charms incident had its roots in a Tuesday lunchtime when Hermione corrected Parvati Patil's wand movement in front of the whole class in a voice that was precise and completely without cruelty, and that somehow, through some alchemy of tone and the particular social dynamics of 11-year-olds, landed like a public humiliation. Harry watched it happen and watched Hermione not notice she'd done anything wrong, and thought, this is the other thing. She was brilliant and honest and his friend, and she had absolutely no idea how people hurt her sometimes. Ron, sitting 3 seats down, muttered something to Seamus Finnegan that made both of them snicker, and Harry gave him a quiet, level look that made him stop, but the damage was done, the dynamic was established, and by Friday afternoon Hermione had heard that no one liked her and taken herself to the girls' bathroom and cried. Harry knew she was there because Parvati mentioned it to Lavender in the common room without lowering her voice, and the bathroom she named was the first-floor girls' bathroom on the right side of the building, which Harry was fairly sure was the same bathroom that a troll was now walking toward, because the Halloween feast had just been interrupted by Professor Quirrell bursting through the doors shouting about a troll in the dungeon and every prefect and professor channeling students back to their dormitories except for Harry, who was standing very still doing rapid calculations. "She doesn't know," he said. Ron, next to him, "What?" "Hermione. She doesn't know about the troll. She's in the first-floor bathroom, she's been there since this afternoon, she has no idea." Ron processed this for about 1 second. "Right," he said. "They went the opposite direction from everyone else. The troll found the first-floor bathroom before they did, or they found the troll, really, turning a corner and coming face to face with 12 feet of mountain troll that smelled appalling and had already knocked over half the corridor's suits of armor and was now attempting to wedge itself through a doorway that was slightly too small for it, which was the only stroke of luck available." Harry didn't hesitate. He looked at the troll, at the doorway it was partially blocking, at the bathroom door behind it, and thought, "She's in there and she has no idea, and this troll outweighs me by approximately 1,000 pounds. Then he looked at the suits of armor knocked across the corridor. "Ron," he said quietly. "On my mark, shout. Loud as you can, at the troll. And move when I move. What are you, trust me." He went up. Not with magic, not exactly, but with the momentum of running at full speed and then jumping at the exact moment the troll turned toward Ron's shout, which gave him just enough reach to grab the troll's left arm and use its turning momentum to swing himself around behind its head. The troll's immediate response was to reach for the thing on its back, and that was 3 seconds of its attention directed away from the bathroom door. "Ron, the door!" Harry shouted, from somewhere near the troll's shoulder. Ron already had his wand out. "Wingardium Leviosa," he said, and pointed it not at the troll but at the club the troll was swinging, which wrenched upward and backward and caught the troll in the back of its own head with a crack that Harry felt through his teeth. The troll sat down very hard. The bathroom door opened and Hermione's face appeared, chalk-white and wide-eyed, taking in the scene with the rapid assessment of someone filing an emergency report to their own brain. "Are you both, is it? It's down," Harry said, dropping from the troll's back and straightening up. "It'll be back up in about 90 seconds. We should be elsewhere." She stared at him. Then at Ron. Then at the unconscious troll. Then at Ron again. "You used Wingardium Leviosa on its club," she said. "Seemed the logical application," Ron said, and then looked faintly surprised at himself. "It was very good," Hermione said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. The wrist movement was perfect. The sound of professors approaching from the far end of the corridor resolved the conversation. They ended up keeping their stories nearly straight, a few inconsistencies that McGonagall identified and chose not to fully interrogate, the three of them standing in a corridor with an unconscious troll and the shared fact of having survived something. Snape, who arrived with Quirrell and McGonagall, looked at the troll and then at Harry with an expression that was several things at once. Later that night, in the common room after everyone else had gone to bed, the three of them sat by the fire. "I was going to be there all night," Hermione said quietly. "I didn't know about the troll." "I would have just, I know," Harry said. She looked at him with her direct, clear eyes. "You said she doesn't know. Before you ran back. That was the first thing you said." "Yes. Why did you remember I was there?" Harry considered the honest answer. The honest answer was that he had been paying attention from the beginning, to her, to Neville, to Ron, to all of them, because he understood now with unusual clarity that the people around you were not scenery or strategy. They were the thing. The whole thing. Everything else, Dumbledore, the ledger, the will, the charms, all of it mattered because of people. "Because you're my friend," he said instead. Her eyes went a little bright. She looked at the fire. Ron shifted uncomfortably in the way boys shift when emotion is present and they want to honor it but don't quite know how. "Right," he said gruffly. "Us three, then." It wasn't elegant. It was honest. Harry looked at Ron across the firelight and thought about the burrow and the payments and Molly's layered attention and all the complicated inheritance of what Ron's friendship was and wasn't and might become, and thought, this moment is real. Right now, this second. Whatever else is true, this is also true. He held on to both things. He didn't let either of them erase the other. "Us three," he agreed. The fire burned down and none of them went to bed for a while. The owl from Gringotts arrived the next morning with the post, hidden inside an ordinary envelope. Ragnok's handwriting, brief, "The Weasley has accepted the will unsealing petition. Hearing date confirmed for February 14th, Sirius Black's imprisonment record has been formally flagged." The thread is pulling. Harry read it once, folded it, slipped it into his inside breast pocket next to his mother's letter. He looked up. Across the hall, at the staff table, Dumbledore was helping himself to toast and talking to Professor Flitwick with the easy warmth of a man who had no idea that the ground beneath everything had been shifting for 4 months. The thread is pulling. Harry reached for his orange juice and started his breakfast and let the noise of the morning break over him like something clean. Chapter 4, The Potions in the Blood. The Christmas holidays emptied Hogwarts like water leaving a bath, sudden, then slow, then gone. By the 23rd of December, the castle had shed most of its students down to a quiet residue of those staying behind: Harry, Hermione, Neville, a handful of older students with complicated home situations, and the staff moving through the corridors with the slightly looser quality of people who'd stopped performing for an audience. The Great Hall felt enormous with 60 people in it instead of 600. The decorations, 12 enormous trees, real snow enchanted through the windows, Peeves currently banned from the first 3 floors after an incident with Tinsel and Professor Sprout, gave the whole place the quality of a fairy tale read in an empty house. Harry had planned to stay. Hermione had stayed because she wanted access to the restricted section during the holiday quiet and had obtained special permission from Dumbledore, which Harry noted with interest. Dumbledore had granted it readily, warmly, seemingly pleased to be asked. Neville had stayed because going home to his grandmother for the holidays meant 2 weeks of careful inventory of everything he'd failed to be, and he told Harry this with the flat factual delivery of someone who has accepted a situation without accepting that it's acceptable. "You could stay again at Easter," Harry had said. "She expects me at Christmas," Neville had said. "Easter might work." On the 24th, Harry left Hogwarts. The journey to London through the Hogsmeade to London magical transit took 40 minutes and involved a sequence of port keys that Ragnok had arranged through Gringotts Channel specifically to avoid any travel record passing through ministry oversight. This had been Ragnok's suggestion, delivered in one of the notes: "It is advisable that your holiday activities remain outside ministry observation. We have arranged private transit." Instructions enclosed. The instructions were 3 lines. Harry followed them, arrived in the back room of a goblin-run financial office on a quiet street off Diagon Alley that was not on any tourist map, and walked through to find Ragnok already seated at a table with Sharpthorn next to him and a file folder Harry hadn't seen before. He sat down and looked at them both. Sharpthorn had her equipment laid out, the copper-capped instruments, a small brazier with something blue burning in it, a flat stone covered in runes. Business as usual. But Ragnok's expression was different from their previous meetings. Tighter. "What happened?" Harry said. 3 things, Ragnok said. In order of urgency. He opened the file. First. The Wisengamot hearing on the will is confirmed for February 14th. However, in the past 6 weeks, 2 of the 4 Wisengamot members who initially agreed to hear the petition have withdrawn. They have cited procedural concerns, which is a polite fiction. The accurate description is that pressure was applied from somewhere adjacent to Dumbledore, not by him directly. He is too careful for that, but by associates who understand his interests. So we've lost 2 votes, Harry said. We have lost 2 votes on the preliminary panel. The hearing itself still proceeds, Gringotts' standing is sufficient to compel it. But the margin narrows. Ragnok moved to the second page. Second. Someone filed an inquiry last month with the Hogwarts Board of Governors questioning whether certain historical account authorizations required re-examination. This inquiry appears to have originated within the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement, from a desk that is, he tapped the page, 3 offices down from the desk of someone who has regular communication with Albus Dumbledore. He doesn't know about the audit specifically, Harry said slowly. But he knows something is moving. He knows something is moving, Ragnok confirmed. He doesn't know where it originates. He is, I believe, casting around. A pause. This is both expected and manageable. What is less manageable is the third item. He produced a separate page and placed it on the table. Harry read it. It was a Gringotts security report, the kind generated automatically when someone attempts to access a sealed audit file. Someone had tried to access the Potter audit records on the 15th of November, using credentials belonging to a ministry official in the Magical Law Enforcement Monitoring Division. The access was blocked, Ragnok said. Our seals held. But the attempt tells us that someone has identified that an audit exists and is trying to reach its contents. We don't know who directed the attempt. We know the credentials were real, but the person using them may have been acting under instruction. How do we keep the contents sealed? The seals are currently maintained by Gringotts' sovereign authority. They cannot be broken by ministry action alone, it would require a majority Wisengamot order. But if Dumbledore secures enough Wisengamot support before February, he could get a counterorder before the hearing, Harry finished. Yes. Harry sat back and thought. The shape of the problem was becoming clearer. He'd known, theoretically, that Dumbledore would begin noticing disruptions eventually, the payment stopping, the Board of Governors inquiry, the slight shifts in Harry's behavior at school that weren't detectable individually but might accumulate into a pattern. He'd hoped for more time. He still had some. But less than he'd counted on. What's our strongest position right now? He asked. Ragnok pointed to the first item. The will. If the will is unsealed and read into the public record before Dumbledore can stop it, everything else follows more easily. The will establishes criminal conduct, not just financial irregularity, but the deliberate burial of a legal document. It establishes Sirius Black's legal guardianship and by extension his false imprisonment. He looked at Harry steadily. If we reach February 14th intact, we are in a very strong position. Then we protect the hearing, Harry said. Whatever it takes. There is one more thing that will strengthen our position considerably, Ragnok said. And that is what we do today. He nodded to Sharpthorn. The 4th session was different from the others. Sharpthorn had explained this in advance. The first 3 sessions had addressed the outer architecture of the charms, the compulsion and the superficial layer of the loyalty suppression. What remained was the anchor, the deepest implantation, the original casting, laid down when Harry was an infant. She described it as the difference between cutting ivy away from a wall and extracting the rootwork from the stone. The primary effect of the anchor, Sharpthorn said, fitting the instruments to his temples with her usual brisk precision, is a deep-level inhibition of your native magical expression. Not your output, not the power itself, that cannot be suppressed entirely, a core as strong as yours would simply burn through a containment. But the character of it. The way it reaches outward. A suppressed loyalty center does not simply limit who you connect with, it limits how your magic connects with the world. Artificially, it narrows. What does that mean practically? Harry said. It means that when the anchor is removed, your relationship to your own magic will feel different. More complete. Some things that were difficult will become less so, not because your ability has increased but because the restriction has been removed. She looked at him with her flat, professional gaze. It will be unpleasant. How unpleasant? More than the previous 3 sessions combined. Harry nodded. Let's go. It started as heat, the way it always did. But this was a different heat, not surface, not structural, but deep and total, like something in the center of him was being held over a flame and the flame was patient and the something was very old and very attached to where it had been placed. He kept still. Sharpthorn's instruments moved over his temples in slow deliberate passes and the blue fire in the brazier changed color, green, then white, then a color Harry didn't have a name for. The runes on the flat stone began to glow in sequence. The sensation was not pain exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a memory you've been avoiding suddenly refusing to be avoided. It came in waves, each one deeper than the last, and what rode the waves was not dramatic, not visions or voices or anything theatrical. Just impressions. The residue of 10 years of suppression burning off in sequence. He felt what should have been there and hadn't been. The full reach of his instincts for people, who was honest, who was performing, who was afraid, who was kind. Not supernatural. Just human, fully operational, no longer muted. He thought of the Weasley dinner table and realized he'd been reading it through fog, not wrong, but incomplete, like a photograph missing its detail. He thought of Dumbledore on the window seat and felt the interaction recontextualize with a clarity that was almost physical. And underneath that, something else. Something that was just, him. His magic, untrimmed, the way a fire looks when you take the grate away. Done, Sharpthorn said. Harry opened his eyes. The room looked the same. Sharpthorn was packing her instruments. Ragnok was watching him from across the table with his crossbow eyes. How do you feel? Ragnok said. Harry took inventory. His head ached. His hands were shaking slightly, not from weakness, more like they were recalibrating their own sense of where they ended. He felt awake in a way that made all previous states of wakefulness seem like half-measures. Very well, Harry said. He stood up and the room was steady, and he felt the Potter townhouse 3 miles away and his wand in his pocket and the faint enormous hum of the city's buried magic and all of it was clear and clean and entirely his own. Ragnok, he said. I want to visit the secondary vault today. The one with the family heirlooms. Ragnok produced a brass key from the desk drawer without surprise, as if he'd expected this request. Cart's ready, he said. The secondary vault was deep. Deeper than the trust vault, deeper than the main family vault, the cart ride down involved at least 3 waterfalls and a section of track that moved on its own and a temperature drop significant enough that Harry's breath came out in white clouds. The goblin driver said nothing and Harry said nothing and the darkness went past around them with the quality of very old and very private. The vault door was set with the Potter crest, a charging stag, same as his Patronus would be, he suspected, whenever he learned that, and opened to the brass key with a sound like someone exhaling. Inside was organized in the way that serious collections are organized, not by aesthetics but by meaning. Shelves with labeled boxes. A weapons rack, several wands, a sword he recognized as possibly goblin-made, items he didn't know the names of. A trunk in the corner bound with preservation charms. Framed photographs on the back wall. Harry stood in front of the photographs for a long time. His parents were young in them, young and ordinary and specific in the way photographs make people specific, the way a painted portrait can't. His mother had his eyes, which he'd been told and hadn't made real until this moment. His father had the same dark hair, the same quality of physical ease, the same particular way of standing that suggests someone who has never seriously doubted their right to be where they are. They were laughing in most of them. Not posed laughter, the real kind, where something has caught you sideways and your face hasn't had time to arrange itself. He looked at them for a while. Then he went to the trunk. The trunk contained, among other things, his father's invisibility cloak, folded precisely, which Harry recognized from the portfolio description. His mother's personal journals, 6 volumes, the earliest dated from her 6th year at Hogwarts. A leather-bound book of Potter family magic, which was exactly what it sounded like, not published spells, but personal magic, developed and refined and recorded across generations. And at the bottom, wrapped separately in dragon hide, a set of 6 letters addressed to Sirius Black in his father's handwriting, postmarked across the last 3 years of James Potter's life, unopened because they'd never reached their recipient. Harry held those for a moment. Then he packed the cloak, the leather book, and the letters carefully into his bag, closed the trunk, and turned to go. He paused at the photographs on the way out. "I know you," he said quietly to the 2 young laughing people in the frames. "Not the way I wanted to. But I know you." He went back up. Christmas Day at the Potter townhouse was the first Christmas Harry had ever had. The house had been prepared by Gringotts' property management team, cleaned, heated, the kitchen stocked. It was a narrow Georgian townhouse on a quiet street in London, the kind of house that from the outside was invisible to Muggle eyes and from the inside was unmistakably magical, bookshelves that shifted their contents by relevance, fireplaces connected to the Fleur network, a back garden with plants that were dormant but would be interesting in spring. Hermione came for Christmas Day. This had been arranged by Harry 3 weeks earlier with the particular careful planning he'd learned to apply to things he actually wanted. He'd told her, she'd asked her parents had said yes with the warmth of people who trusted their daughter's judgment and were slightly overwhelmed by her friendships being with people who had townhouses in London. Her mother had sent a tin of biscuits and a note that said any friend of Hermione's is welcome any time, which Harry had read and put on the kitchen counter and not moved. She arrived at 11, took off her coat, stood in the hallway looking at the shifting bookshelves, and said, "This is extraordinary." "It's mine," Harry said, and the words landed strangely in the air. Not strange like wrong. Strange like true. They had lunch. Harry had managed the cooking with moderate success. He'd been doing it for years, which meant he was competent in the practical way of someone who learned out of necessity rather than interest. Hermione had brought ingredients for something French and they made that instead, which was better. After lunch, over tea, Harry told her everything. He hadn't done this before. With Hermione he'd shared the framework, the person in authority, the long game, the strategic patience. He hadn't told her the specifics, Gringotts, the ledger, 5,000 galleons a month, the will, the charms on his core, Sirius Black, Dumbledore's signature across the whole thing. He told her now. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he valued most about her. She understood that listening was a different activity from waiting to speak, and she practiced it with the same rigor she brought to everything else. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of London traffic through the double-paned windows. She was quiet for a long moment. "He suppressed a will," she said finally. "Yes. He put compulsion charms on a baby." Her voice was very controlled. "Yes. He paid a family £15 million to manage your social development." She looked at the table. "And he's headmaster of a school." "Yes." Another silence. He watched her process it, the particular quality of her intelligence when it was confronted with something that violated the framework it operated in. She believed in institutions. She believed in rules. Not blindly, she was too smart for blind belief, but with the genuine conviction that structures existed for reasons and the reasons generally held. What she was processing now was what it meant when the person who built the structure had rotted it from the inside. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Research, mostly. The Wisengamot procedures for will unsealing. Precedents for reversing improper ministry emergency orders. Anything you can find on the legal standing of imprisoned individuals in inheritance cases." He paused. "And honestly, I need someone who tells me when I'm wrong. I've been thinking about this alone for a long time and thinking alone makes you overconfident." She met his eyes. "You should have told me sooner." "I know," he said. "I wasn't sure how much to trust yet. The charms on my core made you unsure which of your instincts were real." "Yes. And now?" He thought about it, the clean clarity of the morning session, the way the world had resettled into focus. "Now I'm sure." "Then let's get to work," Hermione said, and reached into her bag, which appeared to contain approximately half the Hogwarts library. They worked until 8 in the evening. By the end Hermione had found 3 legal precedents that Ragnok's team hadn't included in the initial filing, one of which was so precisely applicable to the emergency order suppressing the Potter will that she read it aloud twice with the expression of someone discovering a key that had been sitting on a table in plain sight. "Your Gringotts team is good," she said. "But they're working in Goblin law. Some of these ministry precedents, they wouldn't have looked for them," Harry said. He was already drafting a note to Ragnok. "This is why I needed you." She looked quietly pleased. Not embarrassed about it, just directly, cleanly pleased, the way she felt things when she wasn't performing or suppressing. He was still getting used to seeing people clearly like this. It was sometimes a lot. It was always worth it. He went back to Hogwarts on the 28th. The castle received him back the way it always did, the same stone corridors, the same drafts through the same windows, the same smell of candle smoke and old wood and something herby from the greenhouses, but it felt different this time. Not the castle. Him. He was in the 4th floor corridor heading back to Gryffindor Tower when he stopped. The presence behind him had been there for approximately 30 steps. Not threatening, not hostile, moving with a deliberateness that was different from someone just happening to walk the same route. He turned around. Professor Snape stood in the corridor 10 feet back. He was carrying nothing and wore his usual expression, which was several things layered in order, irritation, calculation, and something deeper that was generally not visible but that Harry could now read with a clarity that was new. Severus Snape was afraid. Not of Harry, specifically. But of something in motion, something that had disturbed the arrangement he lived inside and hadn't yet clarified its shape. The fear was careful and covered and he'd been sitting with it for weeks, probably, and it was slowly changing color into something else. Something that looked, from Harry's new vantage, rather like the beginning of a decision. "You've been back since this morning," Snape said. Not a question. "Yesterday evening, actually. And productive holidays, were they?" Also not a question. "Yes," Harry said simply. Snape looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was empty and the torch in the bracket to Harry's left was the only light. In the unsteady light Snape looked older than his actual age, which Harry knew from the audit documentation was 31. He looked like someone who had spent those years carrying something very heavy and had recently begun to suspect the thing they were carrying might not be what they'd been told it was. "You look different," Snape said. The words came out like he hadn't decided to say them. "I feel different," Harry said. Another long beat. Snape's eyes moved across Harry's face with the attention of someone reading something they expected to be able to dismiss and finding they can't. "Your mother," he said carefully, "was one of the finest minds I encountered at this school." He stopped as though this was not what he'd intended to say either. "I know," Harry said gently. Something shifted in Snape's expression. Not warmth, not yet, maybe never, but a kind of shock, brief and quickly controlled. He'd expected deflection or question or discomfort. He'd gotten acknowledgement. "She would have," he started. Stopped. Chose different words, "She would have paid attention to what you're paying attention to." She had a particular, she did not accept things at face value. "No," Harry agreed. "I don't think she did." The torch guttered in a draft and Snape seemed to reassemble himself from whatever direction the conversation had briefly taken him. "Don't be late for the term's first classes," he said, in the tone of a professor remembering he was a professor. "I won't," Harry said. Snape walked past him and down the corridor without another word. Harry watched him go and thought, not yet. But maybe. The man was tangled in obligations he hadn't chosen, carrying guilt that had calcified into personality over years. He was in Dumbledore's arrangement. But arrangements, Harry was learning, were not the same as loyalty, and when the arrangement began to show its seams, when someone like Snape began to feel the difference between the story he'd been told and the story that was actually running, the response could go either way. It could go toward Dumbledore. Toward self-protection, toward the familiar. Or it could go somewhere else. Harry filed it away under things to watch carefully. January was sharp and cold and busy. The Weasley hearing loomed at 46 days away, then 30, then 20. Hermione's research had been compiled and sent to Ragnok, who'd responded with 3 lines, "The additional precedents are highly useful. Please convey my regards to your researcher. We are incorporating them into the submission." Hermione had been quietly thrilled. She'd hidden it well. Harry had told her she didn't need to and she'd nodded and then been thrilled less quietly, which was better for everyone. Neville had returned from Christmas with a jawline that had set slightly differently, not physically, though he was a bit taller. Something internal. He'd come back and sat down at the Gryffindor breakfast table on January 2nd, and when Harry had asked how the holiday was, Neville had said, "My gran told me my dad would have done better in his first term than I did." A pause. "I told her I wasn't my dad." Harry had set his fork down. "What did she say?" "She said I was impertinent." Neville buttered his toast. "I said I knew, and could I please have more potatoes?" Harry looked at him. Neville shrugged, but the shrug sat differently now, not the apologetic collapse of someone making themselves smaller, just a shrug, the physical language of someone who has put something down and is not picking it back up. "She didn't throw me out, anyway," he said. "Small victories," Harry said. "That's what I thought." Neville took a piece of toast. "My gran's not, she's not bad. She just has a very specific picture of what I'm supposed to be and she keeps measuring me against it. I've decided to stop standing still while she does it." "That's everything," Harry said, meaning it. What happened in potions that week was the first visible sign of it. They were brewing Wiggenweld potion, complex, requiring precise temperature management and specific timing on 4 separate editions, and Neville had set his station up with the careful attention Harry had seen him give to herbology when he was allowed to work in his own direction. When Snape came past during the brewing phase, he stopped. Neville's cauldron was producing exactly the right color at exactly the right stage. The consistency was correct. The steam pattern was a narrow clean column, not the billowing mess of an overheated brew. Snape looked at the cauldron. Looked at Neville. Looked at the cauldron again. Said nothing and moved on. It was the absence of cruelty that registered, the sudden missing negative where a negative had always been. Neville blinked at the space where Snape had been standing and then turned back to his cauldron, and Harry caught the expression on his face for just a moment before it was controlled, pure, disbelieving relief, the particular relief of someone who has spent years bracing for impact and found, for once, nothing coming. "Good timing on the bitterroot," Harry said quietly. "I watched the steam," Neville said. "Like you said." He added the next ingredient without looking away from the cauldron. "It works." The moment Dumbledore made his second direct move arrived on a Sunday in late January, 14 days before the hearing. He summoned Harry to his office. The office was extraordinary. Harry had expected something impressive and wasn't disappointed, but the impressiveness was different from what he'd imagined. Not grand, exactly. Personal. Portraits of previous headmasters on the walls, instruments spinning on every surface, the enormous bird on its perch that Harry recognized as a phoenix from his reading, the desk covered in the specific clutter of someone who worked at that desk every day. The whole room had the quality of a life fully inhabited. Fawkes looked at Harry from the perch with an eye that was warm and ancient and somehow more clearly alive than most of the things in the room. Harry looked back, and felt something he didn't entirely have language for, not the manufactured pull of the charm that was now gone, but the real thing, the deep animal response to something genuinely good. Fawkes made a low sound. "He likes you," Dumbledore said, from behind the desk, with the pleasure of a man seeing something confirm his expectations. "He's extraordinary," Harry said honestly. "He is." Dumbledore settled back in his chair. The fire was high and the room was warm, and the whole arrangement, the comfortable chair facing the desk, the gentle light, the beautiful bird, was designed to produce candor. Not manipulatively, Dumbledore genuinely preferred candor and had built his environment for it. This, Harry thought, was the truest thing about him, he actually wanted honesty. He just believed that he already had it. "I wanted to speak with you about something," Dumbledore said. "Something I'd have spoken of in September, perhaps, but I thought it wise to let you settle in first." He folded his hands on the desk. "There are things about your history, about the night your parents died, that I expect no one has explained to you fully." "I know some things," Harry said. "You know the outline, I'm sure. What I'd like to share with you is the context." He looked at Harry with those vivid blue eyes. "Voldemort chose you before you were born. There is a prophecy, made before your birth, that marked you specifically as the one with the power to defeat him. You are, Harry, the only person who can ultimately end the threat he poses." Harry let this land and held his expression in neutral attentiveness. He'd known about the prophecy from the Gringotts records, mentioned in a footnote in the legal documentation, referenced as a justification for Dumbledore's actions, subject to the prophecy of November 1979, per the terms of which PP must be, the rest was sealed, but the existence was there. He hadn't known the specifics. He had the specific now. "That's a significant thing to tell an 11-year-old, Harry said. "It is," Dumbledore agreed. "I have gone back and forth on the timing. I tell you now because I want you to understand that the choices made around your upbringing, the choices about where you lived, about the nature of your early years, were made with this in mind." He held Harry's gaze. "Some of those choices were difficult. Some of them, I know, resulted in circumstances that were harder than I would have wished for you. But they were made with the intention of keeping you safe, and keeping you ready, when the time came." This was the moment Harry had been preparing for since July. The direct confrontation behind the warm eyes, not an accusation, not a threat. A justification. The full architecture of Dumbledore's rationale, presented not as defense but as gift, as trust, as "I am treating you as someone who can understand the necessity." The room waited. Harry looked at Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard alive, possibly, a man of genuine brilliance and genuine love for the world, a man who had signed his name to Harry's sealed childhood and slept soundly, and felt something very clear. Not anger. Past anger, actually. Something quieter. "You put me in a cupboard," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes didn't widen. But something in them went very still. "Harry, my parents will said specifically not to place me with the Weasleys. You buried the will. You put me in a cupboard. For 10 years. Harry kept his voice level. Conversational, almost. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm telling you what happened, because I want to be clear that I know what happened, and I'd like you to know that I know." The silence in the office had an entirely different quality now. Fawkes made a sound from his perch, low, clear, complex. Dumbledore's expression had changed. The warmth was still there, not performed, still genuine, but behind it something had shifted. He was seeing Harry for the first time. Harry understood. Not the boy he'd shaped, or thought he'd shaped, or arranged and managed and pointed in the right direction. He was seeing the actual person that had developed inside all of that shaping. And the actual person was looking at him with clear green eyes and a steadiness that did not come from distance or from hatred but from the simple, absolute certainty of someone who knows what they know. "The will," Dumbledore said quietly, "is currently under Wisengamot review," Harry said. "I expect you may have already been notified. But in case you hadn't, there it is." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He looked older than Harry had ever seen him. Not diminished, that was important, that was the thing Harry had needed to understand before this moment. He wasn't going to diminish. He was going to look at what he'd done and find within himself the absolute conviction that it had been necessary, and that conviction would hold him up, because it always had. That was who he was. "You are more prepared than I expected," Dumbledore said finally, and it wasn't an accusation. If anything, it carried a note of something that might have been respect. "You underestimated me," Harry said. "That's all. I have done that before, with people who surprised me later. He looked at Harry for a long moment. The prophecy is real, Harry. Whatever else you know or feel about my choices, the threat is real. Voldemort will return. And when he does, Harry said, I'll be ready. On my terms, with the people I've chosen around me, knowing the full truth of what I'm walking into. He held the blue eyes steadily. Not on your terms. Not shaped and managed and directed. Mine. Dumbledore sat with that. Then he said, very quietly, your mother would have said something very similar. I know, Harry said. I've read her letters. He stood up. Fawkes sang, one note, clear and high and full of something Harry couldn't name but felt directly in his sternum, the way music sometimes hits before your brain can classify it. He looked at the bird for a moment with the feeling still moving through him. Then he looked back at Dumbledore. Sir. I'm not your enemy. I haven't decided what you are, yet. But I need you to understand that I know. All of it, or enough of it. And I need you to understand that it changes things. He walked to the door. Harry, Dumbledore said. He turned. The old man was still behind his desk, surrounded by his spinning instruments and his painted portraits and the firelight, and he looked, not broken, not beaten, but shaken in the deep way that something is shaken when it discovers it was built on an assumption that was always wrong. Be careful, he said. Please. Whatever you believe about my choices, the danger is real. I know it is, Harry said. That's why I'm not hiding. He opened the door. Good night, Professor. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and the fire was still burning and Hermione was in her chair and Neville was asleep on the sofa and the common room was warm and full of the small sounds of his people existing in it, and Harry sat down in his own chair and breathed. The thread was pulling. 14 days to the hearing. He reached into his breast pocket and touched his mother's letter. A Potter moves through the world like he belongs in it. Working on it, he said quietly, to no one in particular, or possibly to everyone. Chapter 5, Sirius the Owl arrived at 2 in the morning on February 3, 11 days before the hearing. Harry was awake when it came. He'd been awake for an hour already, sitting in the dark common room with the Potter family magic book open on his knee and the dying fire throwing orange light across the pages. The book was handwritten across 4 generations, his great-grandmother's careful script giving way to his grandfather's looser hand, then his father's, each transition visible in the change of pen pressure and the slight shift in how they formed their letters. James Potter wrote like someone in a hurry to get to the next thing. Harry had been reading his father's entries for 3 nights running and finding them simultaneously strange and deeply familiar, the way your own handwriting looks strange when someone else holds the page. The owl was a small gray one he didn't recognize, and it came in through the window he'd left cracked specifically because Ragnok had told him to leave a window cracked on nights when correspondence was expected, which was Ragnok's way of telling him to be ready without telling him what for. The message was 4 words in Ragnok's handwriting, he is moving. Come. Harry was dressed and out of the portrait hole in 4 minutes. The Hogsmeade transit point was a loose flagstone in the floor of the Hog's Head pub, which was closed at 2 in the morning and had been left unlocked by arrangement. Harry used his father's invisibility cloak to get out of the castle and across the grounds, his first real use of it, and the sensation was strange and perfect and private in the way that things feel when they've been waiting for you for exactly as long as you've been waiting for them. He arrived in the London office at 2:30 to find Ragnok already seated, not alone. The second person in the room was a witch Harry didn't know. She was young, late 20s, with the particular quality of someone who moved through the world ready for it to become complicated. Short dark hair, sharp eyes, an expression that suggested she found most situations professionally interesting. She was holding a file that she'd clearly been reading at speed and looked up when Harry came in with the assessment of someone whose job involved rapid character judgments. Harry Potter, she said, in the tone of someone confirming a long-held suspicion. Harry, this is Amelia Bones, Ragnok said. Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Harry sat down. You're not who I expected Ragnok to have in the room at 2:30 in the morning. No, Amelia Bones agreed. I'm not who I expected to be here either. But your goblin friend is very persuasive when he has documentation. She tapped the file. I've spent the last 3 hours reading this audit. I'd like to ask you some questions. Before you do, Harry said, I'd like to ask you one. She raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. Why are you here? Not who sent you or what you've read, why are you here, personally, at this hour, instead of sending a junior official to take a report? She studied him for a moment. Because I have a niece at Hogwarts, she said. And because I became Director of Magical Law Enforcement by understanding what happens when institutions stop enforcing their own laws. She closed the file. I'm here because if this documentation is accurate, and Gringotts' sovereign documentation doesn't lie, then something has been done to a child under my department's watch that should never have been possible. And I'd like to know how. Harry held her gaze for a moment. Checked his instincts, fully operational now, the clean kind, and found nothing false in her. Then ask your questions, he said. She asked them for 90 minutes. They were good questions, specific, legally precise, moving in a pattern that was dismantling and reconstructing the timeline with the efficiency of someone who had read the documentation carefully and was now pressure testing it for gaps. Harry answered everything directly, added context where it helped, and when she asked about the compulsion charms stopped her and said, I want that documented as criminal use of dark magic on a minor, not as a side note in the financial fraud case. Bones made a note. That's the correct characterization. Were you able to obtain healer certification of the removal? Sharpthorn, Harry said. Gringotts Senior Cursebreaker. All 4 sessions are documented. I'll need copies. You'll have them, Ragnok said. At 4 in the morning Amelia Bones put her quill down and looked at Harry with an expression that had moved from professional assessment into something more personal. You're 11 years old, she said. Not accusatory. Just, sitting with the fact. For another few months, Harry said. You've been doing this since July. Since my birthday, yes. She shook her head slightly. Your mother was brilliant, you know. I knew her, slightly. We overlapped in the department for 2 years before she left to have you. She paused. She would be absolutely furious about all of this. I know, Harry said. I've read her journals. Bones looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, there's something I need to tell you. The reason Ragnok sent for you tonight specifically. She opened the file to a page near the back. There is a ministry memo dated yesterday, February 2nd, originating from the office of the Chief Warlock. Which is to say, from Albus Dumbledore's office. It is addressed to the Wisengamot hearing panel for the Potter will matter and it requests a postponement on grounds of procedural irregularity. She looked up. The hearing is 11 days away. If the postponement is granted, he buries it again, Harry said. He delays it. Which in practical terms, given the composition of the current Wisengamot and the weight of Dumbledore's influence, amounts to the same thing. She closed the file. I am here because I have the authority to deny the postponement request on departmental grounds. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement has an independent interest in this hearing that supersedes the Chief Warlock's procedural jurisdiction. She held Harry's eyes. But if I do that, Albus Dumbledore will know that my department has taken a position. There will be consequences for my department. Possibly for me personally. I understand, Harry said. What are you asking me? I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you I'm going to deny the postponement. She said it flatly, the way people state decisions they've already finalized. I wanted you to know it's happening, because you should be prepared for Dumbledore to move faster once he knows the department is involved. A pause. I also want you to know that what happens on February 14th, it needs to be airtight. Because we will only get one clean shot at this before the political resistance organizes. It will be airtight, Harry said. She nodded, stood, and tucked the file under her arm. I'll want another meeting next week. Bring Miss Granger. Yes, I know about her research contribution, it's impressive. Bring the Gringotts filing. She looked at Ragnok. And the Sirius Black material. We need that packaged separately and presented first. The black matter is why we're doing all of this, Ragnok said, which was only partially true but was accurate about the sequencing. Harry looked at Ragnok. Is there news on Sirius specifically? Ragnok reached into the desk drawer and produced a second envelope. Our formal inquiry reached Azkaban 3 days ago. Under Goblin law, any individual imprisoned in a manner that intersects with a contested financial estate has the right to a review of their custody status while the estate matter is active. He placed the envelope on the table. The Azkaban administrator is legally obligated to notify the subject of the inquiry. Harry looked at the envelope. You told him. We informed him that a Gringotts inquiry concerning the Potter estate was active and that his status as named guardian in the contested will was under formal review. Ragnok's expression was as close to satisfaction as Harry had seen it. We informed him 3 days ago. How is he? Ragnok was quiet for a moment. The Azkaban administrator's formal response describes the subject as, and I am reading directly, agitated and communicative after an extended period of near catatonia. He has requested access to writing materials. Harry sat with that. Sirius Black in Azkaban for 10 years, surrounded by Dementors, for a crime he didn't commit, because Dumbledore had wanted Harry's legal guardian removed from the board. And somewhere in that stone prison on its island in the North Sea, 3 days ago, a letter had arrived telling him that someone was pulling the thread. He'd gone from near catatonia to asking for a pen. He's still in there, Harry said quietly. He is, Ragnok agreed. Rather forcefully. Back at Hogwarts by 6 in the morning, cloak folded, the castle still sleeping. Harry went to the Great Hall and sat down in the pre-dawn quiet before anyone else arrived, and just sat. He thought about Sirius Black the way you think about someone you've never met but know through the record of who they were to people you love. His father's letters in the vault, addressed to Sirius and never received. His mother's journals, which mentioned him. Sirius came round again. He's impossible and I love him. He brought James a broomstick attachment that is absolutely going to get someone killed and they are both so happy about it. The will, primary guardian, Sirius Orion Black, godfather, who we trust above all others with our son's life. Primary guardian. Trusted above all others. The man had been in a prison surrounded by creatures that fed on happiness for 10 years, and as far as Harry could tell, he hadn't broken. He'd gone somewhere deep and quiet and stayed there, stayed sane, or sane adjacent, or whatever Azkaban left you when you had enough of yourself to hold on to, and now someone had knocked on the door and he'd answered immediately. That said something. Harry reached into his bag and pulled out the 6 letters. His father's handwriting on the envelopes, each one dated, the newest from 2 weeks before James and Lily's deaths. He turned the most recent one over in his hands. He didn't open it. They weren't his to open, they were Sirius's, and Sirius would get them, and that was that. He put them back in his bag, straightened up, and went to get breakfast. He told Hermione and Neville everything that morning. They were the right people to know. Hermione's expression as he laid it out went through several distinct phases: focused attention, controlled alarm, something that was anger held very carefully at a useful temperature, and then the forward-leaning focus of someone identifying their contribution to a problem. Neville listened with a stillness that Harry had learned to recognize as the particular attention Neville brought to things that mattered to him. When Harry finished, Neville said, "This is why his name was in the audit documents too, isn't it?" "My grandmother." Harry looked at him. There was a smaller payment. Monthly. To Augusta Longbottom. He'd been waiting for the right moment to tell Neville this. Neville had known something like it was possible. Harry had given him enough of the framework in small pieces that the larger shape was not a complete shock. But knowing it was possible and knowing it was real were different things. Neville was quiet for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table in front of him. How much? 500 galleons a month. For 5 years, starting when you were 3. 5 years. He did the arithmetic quietly. Then it stopped. The payments to your grandmother stopped in 1986. I don't know why. Ragnok is investigating. She knew, Neville said. It wasn't a question. His voice was very flat. I don't know what she knew. I think that's worth finding out before. She told me for years that I wasn't magical enough, Neville said, still in that flat careful voice. She compared me to my father constantly. I've been trying to be fair to her, I've been trying to think she just had high standards, but... He stopped. If she was paid to keep me, he searched for the word, small. Neville, Harry said quietly. Neville looked at him. His jaw was set in the way it had been set in the boat on the first night, looking up at the castle with that old burning thing behind his eyes. But now the burning was different. It wasn't the determination of someone trying to prove themselves. It was something harder and cleaner. It doesn't change what I'm capable of, Neville said. No, Harry agreed. It really doesn't. It just explains some things. He exhaled slowly. What do we do about it? For now, nothing. Your grandmother is a separate thread and we can't pull everything at once without losing control of the sequence. Harry held his eyes. But after February 14th, when the main hearing is done and the will is in the public record, yes. We address it. Neville nodded once. Filed it. Went back to his breakfast with the manner of someone who has put something in a specific place and knows exactly where it is and will come back for it. Hermione, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone both moved and furious on Neville's behalf, pulled her notes toward her and said, "Right. What else do we need for the hearing?" The week before February 14th moved at 2 speeds, slow in the days and fast in the nights. Days were classes, charms, where Harry and Hermione had stopped pretending and Flitwick had responded by setting them problems that were more interesting than the standard curriculum, herbology, where Neville had quietly become someone to watch, his hands in soil producing results that made Professor Sprout pause over his work with an expression of professional appreciation, defense, where Quirrell continued to stutter through inadequate material and Harry continued to feel the wrongness at the back of his head like a splinter, transfiguration, where McGonagall had taken to giving Harry problems that were intended for 3rd years with an expression that suggested this pleased her and she found it slightly inconvenient. Nights were planning. The 3 of them in the common room, later and later, Hermione's notes organized into a sequence that was a masterwork of legal argument for a 12-year-old, Neville proving unexpectedly excellent at identifying logical gaps in documentation because he thought in concrete terms and abstract arguments dissolved into obvious problems when he turned them over. Harry working through the Potter family magic book, not because he needed the spells specifically but because every page was context, the way his family thought about magic, the history of it, the how and why beneath the what. Ron watched from the edges of these evenings with an expression that had evolved over weeks from simple confusion into something more complicated. He'd asked Harry once what they were working on and Harry had said something general about research, and Ron had accepted this without pressing, which was very Ron. He trusted people he liked, and he liked Harry, and so he didn't push. But he was smart enough to know that something was happening that he wasn't part of, and smart enough not to pretend he was fine with it, and the combination of those two things meant the conversation was coming. It came on the 12th. Ron caught Harry in the corridor after charms, fell into step beside him, and said in the blunt way he had, "Are you all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "Because you've been intense. 4 weeks. You and Hermione and Neville. We have a project we're close to finishing." Ron walked beside him for a few steps. "Is it dangerous?" Harry glanced at him. "Some of it." "Right." Ron stopped walking. Harry stopped too. The corridor was quiet, late afternoon light through a window at the far end, and Ron looked at him with the lopsided honest face that had nothing false in it. "Look, I know I'm not, I know something is going on that I'm not in on. And I'm not asking you to tell me if you don't want to. But I want you to know that if you need, he stopped, apparently feeling his way through something. "I'm not just here because my mum likes you. I want you to know that." Harry looked at him. The loyalty charm was gone. His instincts were clean. And what he felt looking at Ron Weasley in this moment was not manufactured and not complicated, it was simply true. Ron Weasley had been placed in Harry's path deliberately, but the way he'd shown up in it was entirely his own. His honesty. His humor. His inability to pretend. "I know," Harry said. "Okay," Ron said. "Good." "After the 14th, Harry said. "I'll tell you everything. I promise." Ron nodded. "The 14th of what?" "February." "Right." Ron considered this. "Valentine's Day." "It seemed dramatic to me too," Harry said. Ron snorted. "Are you going to win, whatever it is?" Harry looked at him for a moment. "Yes." "Then I'll wait," Ron said, and they walked on. February 13th arrived and Harry spent the evening in the common room alone, everyone else in bed by 11, the fire burning low. He read his mother's journal. Volume 4, 6th year, the entries from her last months as a student at Hogwarts, before everything. "James asked me again. I keep saying no because I keep thinking I'm saying no for good reasons, and then I look at the reasons and they're getting smaller every time I look at them. Marlene says I'm being an idiot. I told her I was being thoughtful. She said those weren't mutually exclusive. She's probably right. 3 entries later, I said yes." Harry smiled and turned the page. Sirius nearly fell down the stairs when James told him. "I've never seen anyone so dramatically happy about something that doesn't involve them. James says that's just Sirius. I'm starting to think James is right about most things, which is inconvenient because he already knows it." He read until 2 in the morning and then closed the journal and sat with his hand on the cover for a moment. Tomorrow. The hearing was in courtroom 10 of the Ministry of Magic, which was deep underground and had the particular quality of places that have seen terrible things and absorbed them into the stonework. Harry had been inside the ministry for the first time that morning, through an arranged entrance with Amelia Bones, bypassing the public atrium, and had walked the corridors thinking about the fact that 10 years ago a man's imprisonment had been approved somewhere in this building with a signature that took 30 seconds. Ragnok was already in the courtroom when they arrived. And Ragnok's legal team, 3 goblins in immaculate robes who had the focused stillness of people who had been preparing for this specific day for months. And Hermione, who had been given official observer status by Amelia Bones' office and was sitting in the gallery in her best robes with a folder that contained 6 months of research organized into perfect sequence. And Neville, who was there because Harry had asked him to be, and because Neville had said obviously without hesitation. The Wisengamot members filed in. 52 of them, full session. Bones had called it as a full panel, which was unusual for a preliminary hearing and which Ragnok had described as an excellent tactical decision. Full panel meant every vote counted and every vote was visible, and visibility made it harder to quietly pressure specific members. Dumbledore was present. He sat in the Chief Warlock's chair with the composed dignity of someone who had prepared for this and was ready for it, and when his eyes found Harry across the courtroom something moved in them, not anger, not even entirely surprise. Something more like sorrow, which was the most honest thing Harry had ever seen him express. Harry held his gaze for a moment, then looked at Ragnok. "Ready?" Ragnok said. "Yes," Harry said. The hearing opened. The Chief Warlock's seat was occupied not by Dumbledore. He had recused himself on grounds of conflict of interest, which Bones had formally required and he had accepted without visible resistance, which told Harry something about how prepared he was for this to be worse than he could stop, but by Elphia's Doge, who was very old and very careful and did not appear to be anyone's instrument. Ragnok presented first. He was extraordinary to watch in this setting, the authority he carried in his own office translated into something larger here, backed by 3 centuries of goblin law and the particular weight of someone who had an argument so thoroughly built that he could present it with the quiet confidence of someone showing you a machine and letting it run. The financial documentation. The forged proxy authorizations. The buried will. The Azkaban imprisonment record of Sirius Black, with the absence of trial clearly marked. The healer certification of the dark magic removed from Harry's core. Each piece went into the record. Each piece was solid. Each piece was a fact. When Ragnok finished, the courtroom had the quality of a room in which something has permanently changed. The shape of the air in it was different. Harry could feel it. Amelia Bones spoke next. The magical law enforcement position, the compulsion charms constituted criminal use of dark magic under 3 separate statutes. The suppression of a minors will constituted child endangerment. The imprisonment without trial constituted a ministry procedural violation of sufficient severity to warrant automatic review. Dumbledore's representative, a ministry solicitor, not Dumbledore himself, offered what objections were available, which were few and fragile. The documentation was Gringotts sovereign. The healer certification was beyond challenge. The will was real. Then the will was read into the record. James and Lily Potter's voices, translated through 11-year-old parchment into the dry voice of a ministry clerk, filling courtroom 10, primary guardian, Sirius Orion Black, our son's life, under no circumstances, Petunia Desley. The courtroom was absolutely silent throughout. When the clerk finished, Elphias Doge removed his glasses, polished them, replaced them, and called for the vote. The unsealing of the will was confirmed 50-2. The financial fraud findings were confirmed 48-4. The criminal use of dark magic findings were confirmed 46-6. The formal review of Sirius Black's imprisonment was confirmed unanimously. Unanimously. In the gallery, Harry heard Hermione make a small involuntary sound. Next to him, Neville's hand hit the table once, flat, a single contained expression of something large. Harry sat still and let it happen around him. He looked at Dumbledore across the courtroom. The old man was looking at the vote count being entered into the official record by the clerk. His expression was, Harry looked at it carefully and found what was there, not defeat, not calculation. He looked like a man who has seen something he built be genuinely unmade, and who is sitting with the first real understanding that the thing being unmade may have needed unmaking. It wasn't remorse exactly. Maybe the beginning of something that could become remorse. The raw material. Harry looked away. The formal order for Sirius Black's immediate transfer from Azkaban to ministry custody for a full trial review was issued before the session closed. Amelia Bones signed it herself, standing, in front of the full panel. Ragnok caught Harry's eye across the room. The goblin gave him a single nod. Precise. Complete. They were leaving through the ministry atrium, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Ragnok, when the door behind them opened and Dumbledore came through. He walked toward Harry without haste, with the ease of someone who has things left to say and has decided to say them. Hermione went slightly still. Neville didn't move. Ragnok watched with the expression of a chess player observing an opponent's last piece. Dumbledore stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Harry for a long moment, and Harry looked back, and the atrium fountain splashed between them in the golden light. "You've done something extraordinary today," Dumbledore said. His voice was quiet and genuine and completely without artifice. "I want you to know that I see that clearly." "Thank you," Harry said. "I also want you to know," he paused, and the pause was real, not rhetorical, "that I am sorry. For the cupboard. For the choices made in its direction." He held Harry's eyes. "I do not ask you to accept that apology or to set aside what you know. I offer it simply because it is the truth and I have spent too long being certain that truth was something I could manage the timing of." Harry stood in the golden light of the ministry atrium with his friends behind him and Ragnok to his right, and looked at the greatest wizard alive offering an apology with no conditions attached. "I'll think about it," Harry said. Genuinely. Not strategically. "I'll think about it." Dumbledore nodded. "That's more than I deserve," he said quietly. "It is," Harry agreed, without cruelty. But there's a lot of that going around lately. He walked past Dumbledore toward the exit and his friends came with him, and the atrium doors opened outward into the cold London afternoon, sharp and bright and entirely real. On the steps outside, Hermione exhaled at length. "Right," she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. "That was, yes," Harry agreed. "He apologized." "He did. Are you," she turned to look at him, with her direct brown eyes doing their careful reading of him, "all right?" Harry thought about courtroom 10. The will read aloud. 50 votes. The formal order with Amelia Bone's signature. His father's letters in his bag, waiting for a man who was currently being transported from an island prison to a ministry holding facility for a trial that had needed to happen a decade ago. "Yes," he said. "I'm all right." "Neville," Hermione said. "You were very steady in there." "I was thinking about my gran," Neville said. "About that conversation." February 14th to April, then. "April," Harry said. "Yes." They stood on the ministry steps in the cold London afternoon, 3 12-year-olds in their best robes, Ragnok behind them already composing the next document in his head, the city spread out beyond the red phone box and trance with its ordinary afternoon noise, and the thread kept pulling, the world kept moving, and somewhere north of here a man who had spent 10 years in a stone prison was being brought in from the cold. Not fixed. Not finished. But moving in the right direction. Harry put his hand in his breast pocket and felt the edge of his mother's letter. "Move through the world like you belong in it." "All right," he said, to the afternoon, to his friends, to the city and everything in it. "What's next?"